Shilajit is one of the world's most popular superfoods. It's loaded with over 40 trace minerals, fulvic and humid acids, antioxidants, and more. It's a resin or tar-like substance that seeps out of the rocks of the Himalayas at extremely high altitudes, formed from centuries worth of decomposing plant matter and microbial activity, distilled by pure rainwater and pressurized by tons of mountainous rock. In a way, you could say it's kind of like the lifeblood of the earth itself, and we can use it to enhance our daily lives by absorbing its power into our body cells. However, if you've tried Shilajit in the past, you know it's true when I say it does not taste good, and that almost seems like an understatement. Some people say it's like licking an old used ashtray, and some people get a little more descriptive than that. Let your imagination run wild. It's pretty bad. But one thing is for certain. I've tried tons of Shilajit products, and no one has ever been able to cover the flavor, let alone make it taste good, until now. My friends at Organifi just released these new Shilajit gummies, and they actually taste good. They deliver 250 milligrams per serving of pure Himalayan Shilajit. Shilajit's benefits include supporting energy production, healthy hormone levels, performance and recovery, promoting collagen synthesis and heart health, increasing cellular energy, and decreasing fatigue. Shilajit has become super trendy in the superfoods and holistic health world for obvious reasons, and people have long been desperate for a solution to the flavor problem. That's why in the few months since Organifi released these, they've already sold out several times. Visit Organifi.com/TWF. That's ORGANIFI.com/TWF, or just head to the show notes. Take a look at their whole collection, and when you go to check out, use promo code TWF. That code is going to give you a 20% discount on all of their products, and they have a lot of amazing products other than their Shilajit gummies. Find out how these superfoods can help you on your health journey today with Organifi. Ryan Sprague is the founder and creator of the Clarity with Cannabis course, which is focused on helping as many people as possible break dependency and create a healthy relationship with cannabis without having to quit. The Grow with Cannabis course, which opens up how to grow truly high-quality cannabis using organic methodology and biogeometry, and the Conscious Cannabis Collective, a mastermind dedicated to helping students learn how to work with cannabis plants consciously to unlock the psychedelic powers of cannabis for transformation and healing to assist them in ushering in their next level of evolution. He has spent over 15 years working intimately within the realms of plant medicine, holistic health, and spirituality, and discovered the hidden powers of cannabis when bringing his father through the end of his life with the support of the cannabis plant. He has since supported over 5,000 people in learning how to work with the cannabis plant, and his mission is to help the world at large tap back into the psychedelic powers of cannabis for personal and spiritual growth. So I don't remember where I heard this, but I heard some conspiracy somewhere. It's probably a reel on Instagram that I scrolled past within the last year, talking about how in previous generations, cannabis was known to be sort of a psychedelic plant, and there was maybe lower THC quantity in cannabis back then, but higher concentrations of whatever is the sort of psychedelic ingredient inside of it. And it was known to be a psychedelic plant. So like when I'm reading this, you're reading your bio, I like thinking of cannabis as a psychedelic thing has never really crossed my mind until recently, and getting to know you. And then of course coming across this reel, and I had thought of you when I came across the reel. Because my experience with your cannabis was very much a psychedelic. I don't know if it was that with the breath work, is probably both, but yeah. So had you ever heard that before though?
Definitely. That's actually something I talk about often, how since the modern hybridization movement of cannabis has started primarily in the 80s, when people started bringing seeds over from the Middle East and mixing them with the equatorial sativas coming from Mexico and Jamaica and Africa and places like that, that's when actually we started to lose a lot of the psychedelic properties of cannabis, because people wrongly assume, right, because the consumer is uneducated to the most part around cannabis, except for how much THC does it have, and how pretty does it look, right? But the reason that it lost a lot of the psychedelic properties is because somewhere along the way, people started imagining that the best part of cannabis, or the part they wanted the most, was this THCA. Most people know it as Delta 9 THC. We talk a little bit about that outside, how it goes through a molecular change. But most people think that's what gives them the best bang for their buck, right? The stronger the THC, the better the cannabis. That's the kind of correlation that's made. But the thing is that when you're driving up one cannabinoid like that, you're also losing a lot of the others. And that's why now, my friends and I have a joke that everything is gelato, right? Like if you go back 2 steps in the lineage, somewhere in there is gelato or do-si-do. And most things are just like that now. So there's a very small amount of differentiality between most cannabis sold in like stores, which is one of the biggest reasons I'm such a fan of growing your own, because you can actually seek out heirloom, land-raised genetics, which have a lot more cannabinoids such as THCP, CBDP, THCV, and a lot of these cannabinoids that make the full spectrum experience much more psychedelic. And like we were talking about, the biggest challenge that man is facing right now, and not just with cannabis, right? We can look into the microcosm of cannabis, is that we think we're smarter than nature. We think that we can improve on God's design of nature. And again, I'm not against, pulling cannabinoids out and doing science experiments. It's fun. But at the end of the day, thinking that that's going to be better than what God created in cannabis is just a fool's errand, man,
Totally. It's totally foolish. And it's interesting because similar to our food supply, and I'm thinking specifically corn, but this applies across the board. I think the statistic is like in our grocery stores in the US, we typically have a variety of 300 different types of fruits and vegetables, where across the world, there's upwards of like 10, 20, 30,000 or something like that, which is so interesting. We see these what seem to be exotic fruits in some of these grocery stores. And it's like, no, that should like be a part of what we experience and across the full palette. And it's the same when it comes to cannabis. It's sounding like that you trace back the lineage and they come from gelato and this other one.
And that's more recent. Like if you go back farther, skunk number 1, older strains like that. But again, like most things these days, like do-si-do and gelato, those got really big in the last, like say 10 years. And I could be like, over or under that 10-year mark, but right around there, more cooking than baking approach to this. But, again, like once that came out, they looked really nice, right? Like people started realizing, especially I think of it like a dick measuring contest too, right? Like who's got the stronger weed, who's got the prettier flower, who's is caked in more trichomes, right? And that became what was actually called good cannabis from that point forward. And that's kind of where we're at now, is that people are attached to the wrong metrics, in my opinion, personally, when it comes to cannabis and what its whole purpose is in the human experience. Most people are using it like it's a, alcohol, or like it's a dick measuring contest.
Totally. Unintentionally trying to escape, using it as a coping mechanism. That's the first thing that came up when you're describing like which weed is the best to get me the most high. Really, the underlying sentiments for a lot of people there are, which is the best thing to help me escape this feeling that I'm currently feeling right now.
Exactly.
And that's the intention that people are coming into it with.
Yeah. And I tell everyone that, I say, just because you're not making an intention, because some people are like, how do you know intention works? I'm like, well, it's not that you're not making an intention if you don't make one. It's just whatever's rattling around in your unconscious. And the fact that the stats are something like we have 75,000 thoughts a day, 80% of which are negative. Do you want to leave that to chance? And then, we'll get into this more too. This is a big rabbit hole, but then people will go, oh, cannabis made me anxious. Cannabis made me paranoid. It's like, really? What work did you do beforehand to check into your nervous system? What were you actually like portraying in your mind that day, right? Were you in a happy mood? Were you in a negative mood? Don't you think that influenced it a little bit?
Right.
I think people expect cannabis to just be this magic pill every time, when in reality, if you get anxiety or paranoia, or you have an amazing experience, all of that is perfect. That's exactly what the plant was meant to do, because it's meant to mirror back your internal state of reality in an effort to allow you to understand and know yourself to deeper degrees. And a lot of us, we shut this anxiety, any of these undesirable results, away in our subconscious, because we're taught from an early age they're not desirable, they're not acceptable, right? We can't cry, boys don't cry, things like that. So what happens is we start to unconsciously believe these things. And as a result, right, if we're not conscious of what we're doing, that ends up portraying out in everything we do, right? And then when someone has the ability to get anxiety, it's an amazing point, an opportunity point, where they can either take accountability and say, wow, this must have been living in me beforehand, And thank you, cannabis, for showing me where I was feeling anxious inside so I can give myself some love. Or they can just completely bypass and say, oh, cannabis did that. That was a shitty strain. I'm never going to smoke that again. Not realizing that's the entire point of cannabis, right? Like, that is actually how it is a spiritual medicine. Because when we're in our typical waking state of reality, we're in a beta brainwave state. Our ego, our default mode network are doing the best they can to quote unquote protect us. Now, our ego and default mode network, the information is fractionalized, just like in sovereignty, right? Like, the bank teller doesn't know what you're talking about, so they literally think you're insane. Same with, with cannabis, right? And with how the ego and default mode network work. So like, if you have a trauma inside of you, right? Maybe you went through something when you were a kid. Well, if that's painful for you, your ego and default mode network, they just think we got to block them from seeing that. Because the only thing they want to do is keep you safe.
Right.
What they don't realize, though, is that the only way to actually keep you safe is to have you go directly through that anxiety so you can clear it,
Amen.
And so what cannabis does, and I always relate this and give an analogy to a computer. If we are on a PC, right, and we get a virus, we don't try to get the virus out from the normal operating system. We go into safe mode, right? And that's what cannabis does to the human mind and the human psyche. It allows us to get past the ego and default mode network. And what's going to happen is whatever's in there is going to come up. But the problem is that if you look at indigenous cultures, they don't start people out before they've meditated or done breath work or any of these foundational practices.
Or like a type of like rite of passage journey or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like that's like one of like the, they understand in indigenous cultures like that is great power and you need great responsibility to handle that.
Right.
But because we don't have rites of passage of any sort, we don't learn about emotional regulation unless we're really into stuff like you and I are into and your listeners are into. It's no wonder why so many people are getting annihilated when it comes to plant medicines, right? And they're completely missing the entire point of why a human being is meant to connect with those medicines and what those medicines can bring out within their life. Crazy.
So well said. What was your relationship like to cannabis growing up? I'll preface this by saying mine was like, I would say most teenagers in the United States, like hiding from my parents, smoking weed out of a can that we got for like some Reggie. That's what we used to call it. Some really shitty, horrible quality weed.
Mexican brick weed.
Yeah, exactly. That someone sold us for way too much because they knew we were some shithead teenagers, smoking it outside my basement window, out of a Coke can or out of an apple or something like that. Sometimes gutting a Swisher Sweet and then stuffing that full of weed, making our own blunts. And it was always used as like this is fun, dude. We're getting fucking high. And we thought we were so cool. But all that to say, a very unintentional relationship with weed. And I really likened it to just another version of alcohol, just a slightly different feeling and didn't really have any intention to it. And of course, then I was in the Army. And I can say this now, so it doesn't really matter. Anytime I was on leave, I was like, okay, I have 2.5 weeks. I can maybe drink some cranberry juice and take some niacin. So I'll smoke some weed.
Hit the sauna a couple times.
Hit the sauna a couple times, do some extra workouts. But it was always unintentional, just like a form of like another form of getting drunk almost.
Getting fucked up.
And so I sort of threw the baby out with the bathwater for a while and just cast aside cannabis completely. And it was that way until really talking with, I think, Aaron Abke right after I got out of the Army and I knew that he smoked. I'm like, okay, he seems like a pretty conscious guy. So maybe there's another side to cannabis that I haven't explored. And then of course I met you and I've met other people who use it in a very intentional way. They grow it in a very intentional way. So what was your relationship like when you were growing up though?
Yeah, it's funny, man. Started from the bottom, now we're here, right? In a short story, but I'll exemplify on that. So, when I was 16, I found cannabis and I was a just say no kid, right? Like I was starting to hang around at around 14 with people that connected with cannabis because I've always, had acceptance for everyone. Even if I wasn't into something, I'm like, hey, whatever, like as long as you're not trying to like push it on me or whatever, like I don't care. So I started seeing a lot of the classic lazy stoner archetype, which has nothing to do with cannabis.
Is that an official archetype in the tarot?
It should be, right? In the cannabis tarot,
it
for
really
sure.
is. In the U.S. cannabis tarot, that 100%, is 100%.
100%.
Or like the basketball player, that's the other archetype too.
Yeah.
At least where I grew up.
And I mean, if you think about it, dude, the mainstream has done a great job of portraying cannabis like nothing more than just like idiots use it. Hamburgers taste better with it. Cheech and Chong, like you're the dumbest person in the world if you use cannabis.
Yeah.
So of course, right? Like, you know, people that are seeing these movies and then connecting with this plant, abracadabra, right? Like,
Totally.
and that's one of the biggest things that we can get into a little bit of the conspiracy, right? That I believe behind why cannabis and other psychedelics are being legalized now and how it's actually still part of MK Ultra, because now they've done all
I
the
almost
work.
brought that up right as you were
Dude.
explaining some of the stuff earlier. That's
Yeah,
so
and this
crazy.
is one of the main reasons it's so important right now to be conscious, because there is a war going on.
Yeah.
And I don't want to
Hold that thought. You continue on.
I don't want to instill fear in anyone, right?
Yeah,
But we can come back to that. But for me, you know, I was a just say no kid. You know, my parents were never like, never do it. They weren't like that. But they were like, yeah, just don't do it. You know, they didn't have much experience with it. My mom smoked one time when she was 16 and puked all over the shoes of the guy she liked. So she was like traumatized from cannabis. My dad smoked it once in the 80s with his first wife, and they ended up hearing a cop siren just in the neighborhood, and they ended up hiding under their dining room table for like hours being paranoid. So that was my parents' experience. So they were like, just don't do it. So, you know, again, I was hanging around with these kids that were doing it.
Yeah.
And when I was 14, I tried it technically for my first time, but I Bill Clinton'd it, right? And I did it very smooth, so no one knew.
Yeah.
We were staying over this girl's house, and there's like 10 or 12 of us, and we had gone to a stock car race. Her dad was a stock car racer. And it was so funny, man. I had never connected with cannabis ever. I had a lot of like preconceived notions about it. And we were driving up in this big GMC Denali or whatever. And so there's two people way in the back, like in the trunk area, not even in seats, right? And they're splitting a blunt, and the whole fucking car smells like apples, right? And weed. And I remember like just thinking like, how does her dad not know? Obviously he fucking knew.
Right.
But anyway, we ended up connecting with her that night, and just like the vibe was wrong. Like I could just tell like the people I was there with, I didn't want to do that with. So I just Bill Clinton it and pretended to be high all night around people that were actually high.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty hilarious to think back on that. But a couple of years later, I started experiencing anxiety, and I went to the doctor, and after 5 minutes, he told me I had anxiety, which the story aspect of this is a big part of it. Because once the guy in the white lab coat, who I unconsciously knew to be smarter with my health than I was, told me I had this disorder, right? And they call it a disorder. Then all of a sudden I started forming a story around what was possible for me as someone with anxiety. Oh, I guess I can't be a touring musician like I want to do because I can't get on stage because I'm really anxious. So this is all getting framed as a problem. So, you know, I'm playing guitar with one of my friends one day, and he's like, hey, you know, I experienced something similar to what you're experiencing, and I use cannabis for it. Now, again, probably different language when you were 16, like, I smoke weed for that or whatever.
Right.
But I ended up trying it, and I tried it one more time, and not really much happened. I did inhale that time. I was kind of trying to figure out what the experience was. The third time I tried it, right? So I tried it when I was 14, tried it when I was 16. Like a week later, I tried it again, and that's when I got the hit. And all that I remember from it was that I realized, and again, I had no context for what I'm about to tell you at that age, but I realized that was not my thoughts. I realized I didn't have anxiety. I was experiencing it, and something shifted in me. And so, like many people, right, I didn't understand that cannabis had only given me a glimpse of my own power. So I wrongly assumed that cannabis was this plant with all this power, right? And cannabis does have this power, but like any coach, right? And I always use this analogy too. A coach is powerful, but their job there is not to have you start worshiping them, right? They want to remind you of your own power so you can go do great things.
Amen.
That's the role that plant medicines play too. They demand respect, they demand reverence, but they don't want to be worshipped, right?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of makes things awkward. You know, it kind of makes it a weird relationship. So I ended up connecting with more and more of this medicine because I thought, here's this thing that helps me. If I want to feel like I just felt, I must need more of this all the time. So I started falling into, I wouldn't say dependency and things like that. I never felt like I couldn't live without it, but I was a very active user.
Got it.
And I was never an all-day user. I just found that it didn't really work for me, but I was like an afternoon to nighttime user. And so when I'm about 18 now, I'm connecting with a lot of cannabis, and I get into school for psychology because I was fascinated with the mind. I was fascinated with like, what the hell happened to my own mind?
Were you on psychotropic drugs at this point?
No, I had gone through a lot of different pharmaceuticals, and I had never stayed on one because every one I tried made me feel how I would describe it today as less connected to myself, and made me feel like dissociated and things like that. And that's when I finally was like
unconnected to your emotions.
Yeah.
Thank God you had the wherewithal to understand that as a teenager, because most don't, man. Were you on benzos or SSRIs?
SSRIs.
You would have been on
Paxil,
SSRIs for
there was a couple others too. I forget them now, but But basically, I would try them, and it just made me feel terrible. And I just knew in my heart of hearts, I had no awareness of it. My parents weren't into holistic health or anything, but I just knew like this can't be what's supposed to help me. So that's why when my friend finally mentioned it, I was like, fuck it, dude. What do I got to lose? What's the best that could happen?
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so what ended up happening was when I get into school for psychology, I'm in there. And what a fucking joke college is, by the way. I just leave high school, right? Where they're like, well, you need to do all these classes because you want to be well-rounded for when you go to college.
Right.
So I'm excited, right? I start school for psych and I want to get into psychology. And they're like, oh, the first 2 years are gen eds. I'm like, why the fuck am I paying to learn about calculus again? When do I go to my accountant to get psychological help? When do I go to my therapist to understand law? It doesn't happen like that in the real world. So I started to have a lot of frustration towards college. So I'm in there, and about maybe a year and a half, 2 years in, right around 1920, I go to the Boston Freedom Rally, which was a big public display of disobedience, still is, where people come into the Boston Commons and they all smoke weed, and as long as you're not doing anything crazy, the cops don't bother you. So I'm there, and I hear this guy yelling, who wants to make butter with me? I'm walking out of the subway tunnel, and I hear that, and I'm like, all right, let's go. So I walk over to this little tent, his little canopy, and he's passing out these pamphlets for a basic 8-week semester opening up near my house of a cannabis school, cannabis and holistic studies. And
What did he mean by
this,
butter?
Cannabis butter.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking like literally, like raw milk people are there literally making butter. Okay, that's kind of cool. Raw milk people, like, maybe.
How do these like two tribes intersect?
Well, I was thinking like Freedom Rally. I was like, maybe all the people who are into raw milk there.
Dude.
My mind was going off like, what are the laws for that in Massachusetts? I don't know. So, okay.
It's so funny, bro. It's a very unconscious overall. Like, it's a nice gesture. Like, everyone there means well, but like, I mean, the things they're selling there and whatnot are just like shit food and things like that.
Totally.
So he was talking about cannabis butter. You know, they were teaching how to make cannabis butter with the magical butter machine.
Got it. Okay.
And so I end up going up talking to him, and this is the first time I felt a fuck yes from my heart. And so I go home and I tell my dad. Now, one thing I forgot to mention was in between this time when I was 18 and this moment now, I had had my first mortality crisis where I woke up one day and I was washing my car the day before, and I don't know if maybe like I did something or whatever, but I went to the bathroom and just started peeing straight blood. And I was like, holy shit, what the hell's going on here? So I go tell my dad, and he rushes me to the hospital. And on the way there, he's like, son, I got to know, are you doing drugs? And my words exactly were no, but I am smoking a shit ton of pot, you know? And I saw him have a sigh of relief out of the corner of my eye. And that was very interesting to me because, again, my dad was never against it, but he was never for it. It was kind of this neutral, like, just don't do it.
We already
thing.
have the mindset, though, that like cannabis is a separate category than hard drugs, synthetic drugs. Okay, so you already have that mindset.
I knew that because I had experienced enough of it where I realized, like, wait a minute. And even when I was in DARE class, it was kind of weird. Like, hey, drugs are bad, but we have them. And here, you can check them out, but don't you have them? And I was like, well, why do you guys have them then?
Right.
You know, very strange. Like, they're really bad, but we're going to bring them to school and have you sniff them all so you can rat your parents out. It was like the dumbest shit ever.
Dude.
You know, because they have quotas and it's all a business, right? We know that. Of
course.
Just so silly onto the guys of, we're going to keep you safe, you know?
Yeah.
Where they're giving pharmaceuticals out hand over fist and the opiate epidemic's happening and all this kind of crazy shit. But anyway, I digress. So basically what had happened was when I go to the hospital with my dad, you know, I was there for 4 days and I was petrified. I thought I was literally dying. I ended up having a benign cyst in my kidney that had broke open. It was not cancerous or anything. Thank God. Thank fucking God. Yeah. But it really woke me up, you know, because it made me realize, like, why the hell am I growing cysts on my kidneys? And that made me like look at my lifestyle, which at that point, you know, like most 18-year-olds, dude, I'm like eating a lot of Celeste pizzas. Like, I'm sure when I stopped buying them, their company noticed, put it that way.
Right.
Pizza rolls, Mountain Dew, cigarettes, alcohol. And I never liked alcohol that much. I did it as like a social thing, and I always would puke at the end of the night. My body does not handle alcohol well.
Same.
So when I found cannabis, it was kind of like, this works for me. So that was like then my party thing, right? I would like utilize it for my anxiety and help with that, but I would also party with it and things like that. And by partying, I mean like I would get into awesome all-night conversations, you know, with people, and I just started to resonate with that more. But again, I was completely asleep to the fact of any other psychedelics being, you know, positive. I still thought that acid was terrible and all these things. So I still had a ways to go. But when I go to the hospital, I start showing my dad a lot of the research I've been doing on cannabis. And I always mention this because I know that maybe some of the things I'm going to say on today's episode, people might be like, I don't know if I believe that. And I always tell everyone, don't believe anything I say. Go research it yourself, because you may very well need to be red pilled the same way I was. When you start hearing about cannabis and its role in curing cancer, you know, its role in all these different autonomic functions and autoimmune diseases and things like that, I don't want anyone to just take what I say and believe it, right? Like, go research it.
At the least, stimulating critical thought, because what's coming up for me as you're saying this, most 18-year-olds, when they're in a health crisis like that, aren't going to be, or maybe you're 19, 20 with your kidneys, aren't going to think, oh, what about my lifestyle and diet is bringing forth these symptoms?
Yeah.
But I mean, it makes sense historically, and I do want to get into the MK Ultra aspect of weed being legalized now, but historically, they didn't want people to smoke weed because it did stimulate outside the box thinking and more introspection.
Exactly.
You think that was a piece of what led you to think this way about your kidney situation?
I had tapped into something that I didn't have words for. There was like little tiny like appetizers throughout my life until I got the main course, and I'll get to the main course of it.
Okay.
But
sorry, I keep interrupting.
No,
I just
good.
thought
This is perfect, dude. Because it is nice to go back and think about like, yeah, that is interesting. Because I didn't think of it that way when I was actually going through it. I don't know really what led to that. You know, Rachel would say, "Oh, it's your Virgo-ness," you know, or things like that. You know, and I'm an Aries, but I have a Virgo moon and Virgo rising, you know, so I've learned a lot about astrology through her, and it's helped me a shit ton, honestly. But, you know, one of the things that happened at that time was I had seen this documentary called Leaf, and I recommend everyone listening go look this up. It's from like 2011, and it's about this guy named Dr. William Courtney. Such a beautiful story about cannabis, man, where this guy is not a stoner, not anything like that, but he understands the medicine of cannabis. He understands that it can really support the human body because the endocannabinoid system, and we can get more into this, it controls almost all of our autonomic functions. It controls our nervous system regulation. And do you know that they don't even teach about the endocannabinoid system in medical school, dude? It's the biggest and largest regulatory system in the body. It's the only one that has two-way communication between mind and body, and they don't even teach about it, dude, right? So that's another whole thing that we can get into. But basically what happened was in this documentary, this guy, Dr. William Courtney, he meets this woman with something like 8 to 11 different autoimmune disorders. She's on like death's doorstep, man. She can't keep weight on. She's like, you know, in dire straits. And he starts prescribing her raw cannabis juice. Now, the great thing about this is maybe some of your listeners are like, dude, I might try cannabis, but I don't want to get high. The great thing about cannabis juice is it's not intoxicating. You're juicing the leaves of the plant, which have a lot of THCA, but THCA is not intoxicating. It doesn't become intoxicating until it goes to that decarboxylation process we talked about earlier, where it turns into delta 9. You need a flame or heat for that. So he's having her juice these raw cannabis leaves. And what ends up happening is over the course of about 8 to 12 months, all of her autoimmune disorders go into remission. She comes back to full health, and then they get married at the end. And now they do the work together, you know? And wow. I met a woman recently named Dr. Pepper Hernandez, coolest name ever. She's a cannabis doctor. She's an MD. Dr. Pepper, dude. Hernandez. We were joking so much about it. She's awesome, man. Highly recommend getting her on the show. But she cured her own cancer with cannabis juice back in like 2010, 2011. And this stuff started getting much bigger when Rick Simpson came out. You know, RSO or Rick Simpson oil is kind of like the main thing that people are utilizing for cancer treatment. And that's one of the things I utilize for my dad. But the challenge with it is extremely strong, dude. Like, it is very intoxicating. So the thing about the leaves is that a lot of people don't want to get that high. And I don't blame them, right? And so what's great about cannabis is that a lot of people don't realize you don't need the intoxicating aspect to have this plant be extremely medical for you. You can have it be a supplement just like you take your magnesium or anything else, and it works to regulate this endocannabinoid system, which creates balance and order throughout your entire being. And so after my dad watched that video with me, it's like 11, 12 minutes, not long. He was like, wow, I guess I didn't know what I didn't know. And he kind of looked at me at that point and he's like, you know, you're an adult now, you're 18. You have a job, you have a dream, you're going for something, you have a relationship. Like, who am I to tell you that you can't utilize this, you know? And I had been telling him like, Dad, I like this more than alcohol. You know, it really helps with my anxiety. And he had known what I had gone through with it. He never knew that I was using cannabis until this point. Well, actually, I think he knew, you know, I don't think he was that dumb. But at the same time, what ended up happening was after I left the hospital, you know, I started talking to him about like, Dad, we should start growing together. Because his business got hit really hard in the recession. And he needed the good distraction, man, you know? And so I started, you know, sharing this stuff with him. And finally, he ended up buying me a grow kit. We spent like way too much money on it. And it was right before medical had passed. So I had to keep it really secret. And I was growing a couple of plants and I had no fucking clue what I was doing, dude. It was the one time in my life I used nutrients, right? Chemical salt nutrients, because I didn't understand organic gardening yet. And I remember the first harvest was absolutely terrible, dude. Like, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. So then when I come home and I tell him about the school, he's like, well, we made an investment in this grow kit. You should definitely go and learn how to do this stuff properly. So he's like, I'll do one better with you, man. I'll go with you. I'll buy a tuition as well. It was like $500. And so he started going with me. Now, again, he didn't utilize cannabis at this point or anything, but he was just really interested in what I was doing. And he would always bring me to metal shows growing up and stuff. My dad was not into metal. So he was always like down to do things to support me and such a great guy. Very loving, very caring, very funny. And so we end up going to school together, and I was telling him like, Dad, I feel a real feeling around this. Like this feels like exactly where I parked my car. And he's like, well, if you're really serious about this, be the first one in there, be the last one out, offer to help them with anything they want. So now when I get into that school, it's around September, and November that year is the election year in 2012, and medical is going to potentially pass. So I'm out in Boston Commons with the school passing out pamphlets, vote yes on, I think it was 2 or whatever. And then medical passes. So I end up interning at the school. I end up then working for them. And one of the main things I did was, one of the main things Mike and Melissa were doing as part of their nonprofit was, at this point, there wasn't a lot out there about cannabis and cancer, but anyone who's been in the community long enough knows this has been a thing for a while. And so a lot of people would start coming to the school, with cancer, trying to find treatment. And so Mike and Melissa would take the cannabis they had grown up in Maine, they would turn into RSO, and they would donate it to patients. And so we have Dana-Farber in Boston, one of the best cancer centers, if you're looking at Western Med, in the world, right? And these people, this is again like 2011, 2012, these people would be going in there, getting diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, all different types, small cell, large cell, all these different things, coming into the school, getting prescribed RSO through us. And then over
what was the name of the school again?
Yeah, New England Grassroots Institute.
Okay.
Yep, NEGRI
okay.
for short. Yeah, okay. And it was in Quincy, right? Which if anyone's seen the town, you'll know Quincy. But other than that, so basically they would be going back to Dana-Farber every couple of months and getting scans back, and their tumors would be shrinking. They'd be completely going away spontaneously. And Dana-Farber would be like, what are you doing? And they'd be like, we're using cannabis. And they'd be like, no way.
Of course not.
And so it was really funny because I'm seeing these scans with my own 2 eyes. I saw these people 6 months ago. They had tumors everywhere. Now they have none, right? And now
were you getting people who were both choosing not to use chemo and radiation, and also some who were also on chemo and radiation?
Yes. And what I found was, and again, I want to be very careful saying this because I don't want anyone listening to think I can just not do it. Like everyone's got to make their own choice,
of course.
For
and
sure.
This is not medical advice.
Exactly.
We have
not
to say
medical
that
advice.
Too,
It's just
right,
my experience.
Right.
But what we found was that it worked much better if people weren't getting chemo and radiation. But the thing is that it's so like programmed into us that chemo and radiation, if you don't do it, you could lose your life.
Of course.
That a lot of people like not to do that. And a lot of times they would still end up having no cancer at the end, but their body would be definitely more withered, you know, and they'd have more long-term health issues. And again, like I'm not here to tell anyone to do anything. Once again, I always like to add that caveat, but this is what I saw with my own 2 eyes. You can go on PubMed now, this is why I like talking about this now, because there's science out there on it. And you can look up THC's role in killing cancer cells, CBD's role in inhibiting its growth, right? And all these things, let alone all the other stuff we know now with frequencies.
But we're not saying that the repurposed World War I or World War II weapons are bad to use.
Yeah.
Go ahead and...
exactly. You want to do that?
This
go
is
ahead.
not medical advice.
Yeah, I know what I would do as an individual subjectively, but, again, everyone's got to make that choice for themselves.
Right.
So I end up, at this point, I didn't understand, like, this stuff was just coming into my wavelength. Like, all of a sudden, I'm learning about regenerative agriculture. There was a guy there, I remember, named Pat, who was like, yeah, I'm going over to Korea to learn this really interesting farming technology. And I was like, oh, interesting.
And you were already growing at this point?
I was growing, and I was starting to learn, like, this is now like my second or third harvest. And I'd started doing organic soil, and I was now harvesting good weed. I remember my first harvest ever where I really grew good cannabis. It was 2 strains called Wappa and White Widow Big Bud.
What a cool name.
It was awesome, dude. And I remember, like, at that point, it was really hard to find exotics and like really high quality cannabis. And I couldn't tell any of my friends that I was growing, because I was very secretive about it. So I had this whole story that someone out in the western part of the state was growing it for me. And when they harvested, my cousin would drive it all out. And that's when I, like, guys, can you help me trim? And I had this whole story, and they believed it for years, like I really sang it.
You had to keep it under wraps. I get
no one knew that it was just 2 floors under them, And so basically, all this stuff's happening. And then in 2014, I go to EDC Las Vegas. And, I was getting into raving and things like that. And I'd still never done another drug. I would drink a couple beers when I went to raves, smoke some cannabis, et cetera, and have a blast, But I would see a lot of people doing Molly and making what I describe as very interesting life decisions. Just like, here, I got some crystals, lick it off my finger. I'm just like, that's...
Random dudes. Dude, I used to be a music festival junkie. Random dudes walking through the crowd, like selling stuff, trying to shove it in your face. Like,
yeah.
That always sketched me out so much.
Same, dude. Same. And that's why I just had a very like weird image of other drugs, I just thought like, oh, these things are bad, etc. But then, some of my friends who I'd been raving with and whatnot were like, hey, we should try MDMA when we go to Vegas. And something in me was like, all right, I'd be open to it. Like I was starting to like, really open up more. So I started doing a lot of research, and it was like, oh, MDMA is a heart opener. I'm like, I don't know what that means, but I guess we'll figure that out, right? So we go to the EDC, and we take it, and we're in like this big crowd. I don't know who we're seeing, and it's interesting because when it hits me, obviously, like, there's a couple moments of me not even remembering what's happening, and then I realize, like, oh, I think I'm feeling it, and I feel this really interesting pull right here, right wherever my heart is, towards my dad. And I had no idea why, but my logical brain kicks in, and I'm like, well, I'm in Vegas. My dad likes gambling. We're going to steakhouses. My dad and I go to steakhouses. Like, I probably just miss my dad, So I get home, and that was like June 20th or something, right, when I went to that. Well, I get home, and my dad tells me when I get home, like, hey, I got to tell you something. I just got diagnosed with terminal cancer, right? So I remember, like, we're literally cleaning the pool, right? I'm still kind of like tired from like a week of partying, and we're like doing the skimmer, and he just tells me, and he's like, yeah, so I don't really know what I'm going to do about it. I don't want to take chemo or radiation, because he had just finished, dude. Like, talk about a weird cosmic trick from God. He had just finished a 3-year stint of bringing his brother, my uncle, every single week to Dana-Farber, because my uncle had large cell carcinoma. My dad got diagnosed with small cell, which is much more aggressive. So my uncle's was more like long standing. My dad, when he got diagnosed, they gave him until Halloween at best, right? And this was like right around the end of June, right?
Oh, man.
So he didn't tell me that he'd only got till Halloween. I didn't find that out until much later. But basically, I was like, oh, I had no idea how to handle that. He didn't know how to handle it. I didn't want to view him as the sick guy, but I didn't know how not to.
How was he feeling?
He was, there was months, maybe even a year before that, where he would just double over in pain from his lungs.
Okay.
And he would go to the doctor, and they'd be like, we can't find anything. He'd be like, oh, I guess I'm healthy. So I think he knew something was going on, but
I just always wondered that, though, too, when it comes to cancer diagnoses. And I've had a few people who have healed cancer naturally on the show, and they talk about how just the diagnosis itself was so damning. And if you buy into that, of course, you're going to create that reality too. It's so dark and sad. But then there's like objective, something is wrong, and it's like the diametric between that. And yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
It really is, man. And it was weird because I just, again, no one really teaches you that through life. What's going to happen is your parents break down. I was talking to Aaron about this last night. Like, as your parents start getting older and they still think they're younger, and maybe they start to get dementia or Alzheimer's or cancer or whatever. And then it's just like you see them as a human who like now is faced with something they've never faced before. Right. They've never been that old before, et cetera. And so it was this weird like moment of like realizing like, oh, my dad, along with being my dad, is just a human being that's going through something. So, again, like I had a fork in the road moment, Alec, where I started to ask myself, like, okay, my dad wasn't the healthiest person, like he was drinking Coca-Cola, smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day, no joke. That was his thing. He didn't drink any alcohol. He did in the 80s, but it was just a lot of stress too. He was a business owner that went through the recession and all these things. So again, I had this fork in the road moment where I was like, do I love my dad for the person he's always been, loving, caring, et cetera, albeit unhealthy? Or do I try to transfer him into who I think he should be or could be to survive this, but potentially kill his quality of life? So, and make him think that like, I'm not good enough and things like that.
Right.
So I luckily chose the first path. I was like, I'm just going to do what I can to help him, make invitations, but not try to push anything on him. So he started to eat a little healthier, but he was still smoking cigarettes, not really, putting all his effort into it. And after a couple of weeks, he started really experiencing some pain. So, at this point I had been growing long enough, and obviously he was at the school too. And I was like, Dad, we've been learning about this stuff. Why don't I start administering RSO to you? So we took the last harvest we ever cultivated together and we turned it into RSO, and I started administering it to him. Now, again, this is someone who's only connected with cannabis once, and it was a very negative experience, right? He didn't understand, like, obviously he had a lot of paranoia in him when he did. That's why it, manifested. But basically, I thought what I was going to do is make sure he had help to the bathroom, make sure he didn't have any questions. So I would sit with him just like this. We'd watch movies and whatnot. And what actually happened, and this is the whole catalyst that led to the rest of everything I do now, was that I started realizing a qualitative spiritual aspect of cannabis that I had never known before. Everything I experienced with cannabis so far was very logical to me. It was like a medical thing, a science thing, etc. And all of a sudden, my dad and I were best friends. I have a stepbrother and stepsister, but I grew up an only child. And so I was going to car shows every weekend with my dad in the good season. I was going to breakfast every weekend with him. Very close. Same with my mom, all very close. So I thought I got this guy figured out. Well, all of a sudden, this medicine hits him, and all of a sudden, a whole different side of my dad comes out. I'm starting to hear him tell stories I've never heard before. I'm starting to have him ask questions to me about like, death and what I think happens and things like that I didn't have any context for either. I had never really thought about that stuff. And so like, this just beautiful bonding moment with my dad, realizing like, if I could describe it in language of today, him realizing, even if he didn't know it intellectually, that he was infinite. The death was just another ending to an infinite sea of chapters, and just like maybe the next volume in a book. And so over the time that I was supplying him this cannabis, we were getting his scans back and his tumors were slowing their growth. They were still there, right? Because he was still doing a lot of the things that gave him in the first place. A lot of stress specifically, because I think that's the ultimate thing that gives cancer is stress and disease of any sort of stress, right? And pressure you put on yourself. He also had some trauma in him and things like that. Because, that era, dude, they just thugged it out, dude. They didn't really deal with anything, and props to him, for being able to move through that and live their life like that. But, again, like during that time, I got to watch him have closure with his grandchildren, his other children, me, my mother, but most importantly, his own mortality.
Mm-hmm.
We got to take the heaviness out of conversations like death. And, he ended up lasting until the following June. So about 8 more months than they gave him. And during that time, he got to keep his dignity. He got to die at home just like he wanted to. And he got to keep his head of hair because he had a great head of hair. That's where I get it from. And that's what he wanted. And so during that time, I really realized like, wow, I can't go back and do it differently and say, I don't know if I would have had that time with my dad if it weren't for cannabis, but I truly believe I would not have had it. And so during that time, after that, I really got a fire under my ass. And I was like, I don't know what the fuck I just experienced, but that is what cannabis really is all about. And I have to start sharing that somehow. So I ended up getting into working at a dispensary after he passed. About a year after he passed, I got into a dispensary and I worked there for 5 years with over 5,000 medical patients. And I started helping them not just with cannabis, but with a range of holistic health stuff, because now I was full blown into the holistic health stuff. When I went to the school, there was a holistic health advocate that worked there, and she got me into eating sprouts and apple cider vinegar and all these things that are now like
I figured if you're growing organically, like how can you not?
Exactly, and organic food.
You see the difference between the organic weed that you're growing versus the organic or the inorganic cannabis that you had smoked when you were younger. Like, how can you not, with your own direct experience, be like, okay, makes sense now to put organic food into my body too.
Yeah, I started realizing like, oh, you are what you eat, and you're also what you ate, and so like my decisions matter, like this is what creates my reality. It's not the external world, it's the decisions I make. And if I make them and realize they're out of alignment, I can't blame anything out there.
Right.
I get to look in here, and that's actually a great opportunity. It's not something to be upset about, And so I started realizing these things. Again, it didn't all happen overnight. There was like sequences, right? I can talk about it now like it was overnight, but it took a while. But what ended up happening was, when I was doing these things and at the dispensary, I started to form kind of like a cult following there, which was very awkward for me. People used to call me Weed Jesus there. It was like very cringy. I would laugh at it, but it was kind of weird.
Did you have long hair at the time too?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, yeah. So kind of looks the part. And, here I was, and most bud tenders don't know that much about cannabis. They'll know maybe the strains on the menu. They'll understand THC and CBD, but I was like berserker mode researching cannabis and holistic health and other psychedelics. Because once I tried MDMA and realized I'd been lied to about that too, I hit psilocybin like the week after. Then I tried LSD, and I was just like, oh my God, dude. And my consciousness has started expanding rapidly. So then when I worked at the dispensary, people would come in and they'd be like, oh, this cannabis isn't working. I'm like, well, what's your diet like? What's your water like? And they'd be like, why does that matter? And I started explaining it to them. Then they'd start trying it. And then they'd come in and be like, dude, what the hell just happened? Like, now I get way higher, right? Because that's where they were at. That's what they cared about. And then other patients would be like, well, wait, what did you tell them? And then they'd start telling them like, this kid told me to drink this kind of water or eat this food or fast for a day. And so then people started being like, no, I want to talk to him when I come in. And so I'd get this line forming for me. And people started, a lot of my coworkers were like, dude, you should like, be a teacher or something like that. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And then our family owned business, right? We were like the most gangster dispensary in the state, dude. We're one of the smallest. We were the 7th dispensary open in the city of, in the whole state of Massachusetts. And even though we were very small, we didn't have any like, multi-state organization funding, no hedge fund funding. We were all like people that came from the real cannabis world.
Right.
We've all been in it since it was very illegal. We all risked our freedom for it. So like the chef on hand was one of the best bakers in all of Boston. We got on Conan O'Brien for our medicated bar pizzas. We were making medicated corn dogs, medicated jars of peanut butter, medicated mayonnaise. I mean, dude, you dream it, we were making it, bro. Medicated hot sauce. I mean, dude, anything, right?
Man.
So we were like very unique. People drove from all over the state to come because we also had very unique strains, because where all these other growers in the state were just getting like seed packs from the UK.
Right.
Jamie, our head grower at the time, was hooked into all the Jungle Boys and everyone out in California. So we had like Sunset Sherbet and Wedding Cake way before anyone else did. And we were growing it with a lot of love and intention. We really were passionate about this plant. It wasn't organically grown. We were still using chemical salts, but the intention was there.
Right.
And so people would come from everywhere, and we really had a family vibe there. People wouldn't go to any other dispensary. They loved us. A lot of people would come in and be like, dude, we just love coming to see you guys. You brighten up our days. So we took a lot of pride in that, So then our company got bought out by a corporation because the owner, sweetest guy ever, he was in it for the right reasons, dude. He was in New York when 9/11 happened, and he was right in Manhattan. And he ended up getting crazy PTSD. And he was working very high up at Avon, like as an accountant or like some finance executive. And after that, there was years where he couldn't work, and the only thing that got him back to work was cannabis. Cannabis helped him overcome his PTSD, and so he proposed that when he retired, he would spend his money on opening a dispensary and give him back to other people. So that was the energy of the place I was at first. Then the place that bought us, I won't say their name, but they were typical finance bro. They had a yacht called Sea Hunter. It was just like so awkward, dude. And that energy in there, people that came from Home Depot coming in and saying, we love you guys. We're going to keep everything the same. It was like, guys, you realize we do psychedelics, right? We can see right through your bullshit.
Right.
So before long, they took the kitchen out. They started supplying us with these shit edibles, right? And they were doing all this stuff that I was getting very fucking angry at.
Yeah.
And then our patients coming in were like, hey, why is everything changing? And we had to be like, they were telling us, like, just lie to them and tell them everything's going to be fine, too, because they took over the grow. They fucked the whole grow up. They were saying, oh, your
took
grow
the
rooms...
intention out of it, made it more about getting money than
Exactly.
actually administering a quality product.
And they brought all their friends from different parts of the industry. Like our head grower was actually a production, hand at a dispensary out in Colorado. So he had no idea what he was doing running a grow.
God.
Then he was like, oh, your dispensary just sucks. The grow rooms suck. And we were like, dude, we had the best weed in the whole state for the last 3 years. Like, I don't know what you guys are doing. So anyway, the reason I mention all this is because what I want to articulate here is at that point, I was living my life like a victim still.
Yeah.
I was thinking, God damn it, this company took us over. This shouldn't have happened. This sucks. We had something good going. And at the time, I really was a victim about that.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was because they were doing everything wrong, it actually finally ignited me with enough fire that I was like, I can't deal with this anymore. So I have to figure out something. So me, my girlfriend Rachel, who I met at the dispensary, right? That's another funny and cute story.
Wow.
And then my buddy Devin, we were like the three aspiring entrepreneurs. He runs a great delivery service out in Boston now called Rolling Relief. And we decided to go to MJ BizCon out in Vegas. We were like, you know what? Fuck this, dude. We'll go out there. We'll find our own investors. We'll bring love-grown cannabis and real cannabis culture back to this state. We got this. So we go out to Vegas and we had all these expectations, right? That's what I want to articulate here. We had all these expectations. We're going to go out there. We're going to find investors. This is going to be easy. So we go out there and literally, Alec, we walked into the belly of the beast, bro. Like when we went out there, it was all finance bros, just like, how many grams per square foot can you grow me? How cheap can you do it? Right? All like this is not where I parked my car. These are not the droids I'm looking for moment. And so on the last night there, we didn't even go to the conference that day. Maybe we went for an hour and just got out of there. It was so cringe. And the last day I asked Rachel, I'm like, babe, it's our last day in Vegas. Like, what do you want to do? And I was expecting she would say something like, I don't know, like figure out what we're going to do when we get home or make a plan, get home early. And what she actually said was, I don't know, do you want to like take some MDMA and go to a strip club? And I was like, holy shit, best girlfriend ever award for 500, please, Alex. And as funny and innocent as it sounds, I had never been to a strip club. She had never been to one. So I understand what they are, obviously, but I had no idea what to expect. So we take a little Molly. And the reason I mention this, because it might seem like out of left field for anyone who's listening into this, is because, like I told you, I had a lot of expectations when I went to Vegas.
Right.
I now lost them all, right? I was like, fuck it, we're just going to have fun now, right? So we go to the strip club and we get in there and we just have a blast, man. We're talking to all these strippers and they're hanging out. They're like, man, you guys are different, And we're like, well, like we're on a little bit of Molly. And so we're hearing their life plans and they're telling us their business plans and all this stuff. They're going to open beauty shops and all this stuff. And we just have a blast. And Rachel had told me, can you please make sure we're out of here by 4:30 a.m. Because we had like a 1 o'clock flight the next day. So I'm like, yeah, sure. So I looked down at my phone at one point, expecting to see 4:30 or right around there and be like, yeah, I crushed it. I look down and it says 7:30 a.m. And I'm like, fuck. So then I go up to Rachel and I'm like, hey, babe, what was your definition of on time? Like, what's your definition of it? She's like, why are you asking me this? Right? Because I have a thing with time that I've overcome now, but me and time are not exactly calibrated. So I'm like, well, what if I were to tell you that it was actually 7:30 a.m. right now? And she was like, what the fuck, man? Because she had been taking side work, trying to get out of the dispensary, same way I was. One of the projects she had taken is writing a 600-page application of legalese for a Chicago, Illinois dispensary. You want to talk boring, khakis, office supplies, that kind of vibe? It was ultimate that. So she went through a period in the strip club of like frustration, not even towards me, but definitely like kind of because of me, right? And typically my pattern at the time, when someone else I would feel them get upset and I maybe thought it was because of me, I would try to lessen the blow, be like, well, we were having fun. I didn't know. Like I would try to like,
minimize
get out of
the
it.
Situation.
Exactly. And it wasn't me taking ownership, like it wasn't me accepting like, hey, I did this. And if I want to not do it next time, I have to take ownership over this. So I remember that like, this sucks to feel this way. Like I need to take more emphasis on making sure that I'm keeping track of my time and things. So in that moment, I don't know if it was the heart open state or whatever, I just owned it. And I was like, yeah, babe, I fucked this up and I'm really sorry. And she was like, it's okay, and she wasn't mad or anything like that. She was like, I just don't know how I'm going to work on this thing on the plane. But in that moment, something profound shifted in me. And I didn't think that was going to happen. Again, I had no expectations. And it's weird with Vegas, dude. I have like the awakenings in the most like otherwise dark scenarios.
right? In a
like,
strip club
I'm in a
Vegas.
strip club in Vegas, like one of the darkest energies you can think about. And I have this life-changing epiphany where all of a sudden I don't even know how to describe it, but I go through this like very big shift. And then the next, I'm like, what the fuck is happening? But I'm like, I got to go to bed because I got to get a couple hours of sleep. So the next day on the plane, I'm like sitting there and I start like going into a meditative state and I start communing with what I now know is my soul and now training how to talk to my soul. And I start asking my soul, I'm like, what the hell was that feeling of like feeling this like uncomfortability? But the reason the way I felt it actually led it to being positive. My soul was like, dude, that's called emotions, man. And you haven't been feeling all of them. And I'm like, no. Like I do all the things right. Like I'm looking into this stuff. And my mind, my soul was like, do you ever wonder why you smoke weed every night? Do you ever wonder why you keep yourself busy all the time? Like, have you noticed that picked up a lot after your dad died? Because I thought I had processed my dad dying, etc. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I see it now, right? So at first, right, I fell back into the old pattern. I was like, oh, cannabis did this to me. Oh my God, like I'm going through an identity crisis. So I come back home from that trip. And one of the funny things was I always used to keep my hair in a tight ponytail. And I was suffering with daily headaches for like 2 years, dude, right? And when I come home, I'm just like, why don't I always have my hair in a ponytail? And I just take it out, right? I let my hair down figuratively and literally. The fucking headaches go away. I go back to the dispensary. I'm still working there. And people are coming in. Wait, Jesus, what's up? Oh, what are you smoking on tonight? And I'm like, oh, actually, I quit cannabis. I'm not sure if I'm coming back to it. And they're like, what? And I have this really interesting feeling around it. Like, I'm not scared about it, but I'm like, this is really weird. And so the first 6 weeks, I really believed cannabis did this to me, right? And then in about 6 weeks, I had the second level of that awakening, where all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute. If this happened to everyone, I've worked with over 5,000 people in this space, it would have happened to everyone. So it's got to be me once again. Then I started realizing like, wait a minute, cannabis never held a gun in my head and made me connect with it. I'm the one doing that every night unconsciously. So it's not cannabis, it's me. So then after another 6 weeks, I was like, well, let me test my theory. So I then invented this thing out of thin air, right? Like, and a lot of people think this is like, and the reason I mentioned I invented this out of thin air is it's not the right way. It's just the way that worked for me. Because I have a lot of people reach out like, dude, I'm smoking weed on weekdays. Is that bad? I'm like, guys, my frequency was to connect only on weekends because my pattern was to go to this job I didn't like, build up all the frustration I needed to make a change, and then come home and soothe myself and then be like, whatever, and just watch YouTube videos and learn some cool stuff, but not make any changes in my life.
Right.
So then when I cut that out, all of a sudden I started the podcast right away. I started making a plan to leave the job. And so by the time these 12 weeks came up, I was like, I've made some severe changes. I then left the dispensary.
What year is this?
This is 2020 now.
Okay.
This is right getting into 2020.
Wow.
This is like right before the pandemic, dude,
Wow.
right? So what ended up happening was, and I'll tell this part of the story because it is funny. I kept getting this feeling, I want to leave this job. I want to leave this job. Like it was getting easier and easier to think I'm going to leave. But they were trying to get me to work weekends, and I had never worked weekends. And for me, I'm like, I don't work weekends, right? Like I went above and beyond at that dispensary. I'm like, listen, guys, like I should get this benefit, not to should have myself, but I should get this benefit of not working weekends because I'll do way more. I give people my number and recommend you guys and all these things. So they keep trying to get me to work weekends, this new company. So I keep pushing it out. Well, I'm my mom's caretaker, and all of a sudden the pandemic happens, and they come up to me, they're like, Ryan, you should really think about collecting unemployment because, this is going to be a big thing, and, you take care of your mom. And I was like, okay. So then I get to leave the job, I get to collect unemployment, right? And I use that money to start the business, start the podcast, everything. I'd already started the podcast, but now I have all this space in my life, right? So what happened was I knew my pattern was Monday through Friday, I was numbing out, right? On the weekends I was too, but I wasn't stressed on the weekends usually. I was just having fun. So what I just decided to do was okay, I'd been learning about intention. So I decided to all week, I was gonna write down anytime I got triggered. I was gonna just take a note of what it was. This person said this to me at work and it got me annoyed. Or my mom did this or whatever, a friend did this and it got me annoyed. So I would keep track of those all week. And then I would create an intention based around those. And then I would go directly into it with cannabis. What I started realizing was, holy shit, you can heal trauma. You can heal these things with cannabis. And yeah, a lot of times it's uncomfortable, but that's what it's meant to be.
Right.
That's when I started realizing, oh my fucking God, the
so
anxiety.
So you were avoiding the uncomfortability that a lot of people experience with cannabis. You were going deeper into
exactly.
it.
And I started realizing this plant only knows to do what we program it with, right? It's not the plant's job to know why we're going to it. And once you're clear with cannabis, I'm looking for this, the plant's like, dude, thank God for asking, man, because the plant is feminine, right? And if we think about a mother, right? Say your mom comes in when you're a little kid, you're home from school, you're sick, right? And your mom's like, Alec, do you want anything? And you just stare at her. She's probably like, all right, you weirdo. I'll go get chicken noodle soup. Maybe you don't want chicken noodle soup, right? Yeah. So she comes back in with you and you're like, I don't really want it. And she's like, what do you need? Right? She doesn't know.
So again, that's kind of it's going to go with whatever's rattling around in your unconscious. So if you come into it with a conscious intention and tell it what you want, it will bring about what you want.
Exactly. And you know what the great thing about that is? In a heightened, altered state, you start realizing when that happens the first time, you go, whoa, my intention does have power. What happens if I do it to my food? What happens if I do it to my water? Oh. And then it starts going on and rippling into all of your life. And that's what I see cannabis is really doing. It's not about cannabis. It never has been. Even the plant will say that. It's about what the plant can remind you about your own fucking power, dude. And then how you can take that magic and go remind the next person, not through telling them, but by embodying and lighting up yourself. Because when you're a lit up human being, dude, the souls that are ready to evolve in this lifetime, because not everyone's meant to evolve, and that's perfect as well. It's all divine orchestration. But the people that are ready are going to start going, dude, Alec, you look really happy, man. What have you been doing? And that's your soul going, I'm ready for the next step. And that's the best thing we can do for all of our brothers and sisters is just be what we say. Instead of trying to tell people what to do, which everyone is stuck in, not everyone, but a lot of people. I was stuck there for many years trying to tell people because I think this worked for me. I know this is good for you. The best thing you can do is just be the embodiment of it. And the right people will ask you.
Maybe you are the cannabis Jesus, because that sounds
dude, it's really funny, man. Maybe that archetype rubbed off.
That literally sounds like Christ to me.
Well, it was funny, Aaron and I were talking last night in an altered state, right? And, he was like, that sounds like something an enlightened being would say. And, again, I'm very careful to ever put those terminologies on me because there's a lot of people that will say that. And I think it's super cringy. But, I told Aaron, I was like, well, the only way I could see that being accurate, I don't ever call myself enlightened or whatever, who knows, right? But again, the one thing is that supposedly if you're enlightened, nothing changes. And that is what I experienced. If that is true, it's like chop wood, carry water before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water after.
Exactly.
The only thing you maybe get is a little bit of space from your thoughts. And that's definitely happened. But, again, cannabis has taught me these things. And the funny thing about it, and I'll stop talking in a second. I know this has been a whole monologue.
This is incredible, dude.
But when you look at the actual history and Chris Bennett, right? For anyone who's curious about this, look up Chris Bennett. He's a much better historian than I am when it comes to cannabis. I focus more on the spiritual and the application side, but he's researched how cannabis and the spiritual use of it goes back over 10,000 years. It's mentioned in almost every sacred text. In the Bible, dude, you have Jesus's anointing oil. Do you know what the recipe for that is? It's a plant they call cannabosum, right? Which he believes is mistranslated. They mistranslated it to mean calamus, which is a pretty normal everyday plant. And then it's grain alcohol cooked over a fire. And then the oil is rubbed on people and it performs miracles. Well, if you look at cannabosum as cannabis, how do you make RSO? You combine it with grain alcohol like Everclear. You cook it on a hot plate, which would have been a fire back then. It turns into a black goop, and then you eat it. You rub it on your skin for melanoma, things like that, and it performs miracles. So I don't know. It's a correlation. I'm not here to say it's definitely that, but it is very interesting. And then you look into almost every religion, and they have a or spirituality practice rather, and they have mention of cannabis in there, right? And so these things are a big red pill for people to swallow, because how this all happened, right? Like how this whole propaganda smear campaign happened was back in the 30s. Cannabis was a part of almost every medicine on the market at that point. 80-something% had cannabis in them. Doctors understood it was very beneficial. They maybe didn't know the science behind it with the endocannabinoid system and things like that weren't found later, but they knew it was helping people. And so what happened was there was 3 individuals, probably more than that, but 3 main ones. Harry Anslinger, who became the first head of the DEA when that was established. William Randolph Hearst, who was a very rich, influential man who had shares in nylon and other textile industries, and Andrew Mellon, who owned the biggest journalism empire at that time. So we know what the mainstream media does today, even with the internet and people being able to kind of tell the truth. And we still know how much it fucks people. Think about back in the 30s, dude. Like, you got a paper and whatever that was gospel, right? So these 3 got together and they were like, dude, we all have vested shares in oil and nylon and all these things that hemp could completely destroy. We got to do something about this. So they invented this myth, and anyone can go look this up. What I'm about to say is going to be crazy to anyone who hasn't heard this, but they invented this smear campaign called Reefer Madness, where they invented a story that Mexican men were coming over the border with this new plant that had never been seen before called marijuana, and they were raping white women with it. So they went to Congress overnight and they explained this case, and Congress was like, are you sure you don't want this to be like kind of a longer process vote? Like, are you sure? And they were like, did you hear what we just said? People are getting raped, right? And so they banned this literally overnight. And in the morning, every doctor woke up and goes, wait a minute, they just banned what? And then the smear campaign continued, right? And people started literally part of Reefer Madness is when people smoke marijuana, they take a hatchet and they run through the streets hacking people apart. It's ridiculous, right? But this is what people believed back then. So then you get the war on drugs. Then on top of that, all this dangerous stuff, they start depicting it in Cheech and Chong. They start depicting it in Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. And for the people utilizing it, we had to worry about our freedom, dude. We had to hide it. We had a lot of shame and guilt. That's a lot of what I repair in people, right? And help people kind of transcend is a lot of the shame and guilt around utilizing a fucking plant, dude, that was put here by God to support us in remembering who and what we truly are.
Amen.
You know, the idea that humans believe that a natural plant is either good or bad, depending on what imaginary line you're on, is just completely fucked,
Insane.
right? And once you see it, you can't unsee it, but a lot of people just don't see it, right?
It even permeates a lot of the holistic health community, where people look at, I even thought about coming into this interview, how many people are going to misjudge because I'm having someone on talking about cannabis.
Exactly.
And I'm like, those are the people that need to hear this more than anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I really like being a walking red pill for people when it comes to cannabis. Dude, I work out 6 days a week. I run 2 businesses. I do all this stuff. Cannabis is not what you thought it was. No. It's the human being. Cannabis is perfectly safe. What humans do with it, right, with their own patterns and programs, is their own accord. And at the end of the day, it's not the plant's fault that people do dumb shit with it. Yeah. And my whole argument is not that there's no danger associated with how people connect with cannabis, but let's stop blaming the wrong sources. Let's stop externalizing our power, because if we're doing it with cannabis, how we do anything is how we do everything. If you look at the microcosm that is cannabis, if someone blames cannabis for anxiety, in the scheme of everything, is that big of a deal? Probably not. But when you think about that pattern playing out and them being the victim of their life in every way, because if you're doing it one way, it's not like you're going to be owning your life in every other category and not do it with cannabis. Right. It's not the natural laws of the universe. And that's why it matters. I talk about often, everything I teach with cannabis, even though it's all seems like it's focused on cannabis, it's not. It's about teaching people how to utilize it to get what I'm talking about. And then whatever gets shown to them is what we talk about and we implement into their life. That's what I do with all my courses, my mastermind, everything like that, you know? And so it's really when people see me and they're like, wow, dude, you're really articulate. Wow, you're really ripped and things like that. They're like, how are you the cannabis guy, but you have these things? And that's why
because of the
I
stigma.
do it.
Because of the stigma.
Yeah. It's crazy.
If you're enjoying this episode, please consider sharing it with at least one friend or family member who you think could benefit from hearing it. You help us grow and reach more people by sharing it with those around you. Also, be sure to head to the show notes to check out our membership offerings, membership marketplace, and more. In nearly all cases with modern health systems, you're waiting months for appointments only to spend a mere 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly hands out a generic diagnosis that is likely rooted in a total misunderstanding of health and causes, and then you're offered a one-size-fits-all medication or invasive treatments with unpleasant side effects. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic, founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected natural health doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowan's holistic perspective on health and wellness and a deep understanding of the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. With the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes and suppressing symptoms. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that health is unique to the individual and that illnesses have a variety of causes, physically and metaphysically. Members of the New Biology Clinic enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and much more. Unlike traditional healthcare systems that thrive on frequent visits, prescriptions, treatments, and suppressing symptoms, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to make you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more and use code THEWAYFORWARD for $50 off your account activation. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com to receive $150 off your account activation. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. If you're listening to or watching the show, chances are you probably look out at the state of the world and think, I know there is a much better way of doing things. So many of us have a vision of living off-grid with like-minded people, unschooling kids together, building community together, trading and bartering together, growing food together, and sourcing clean, spring-fed water together. And with modern society headed towards the cliff of tyranny and the centralization of power, it's important to consider a life where we can thrive irrespective of what happens with the rest of society. Most of us know what we want and why we want it, but few have cracked the code on how to achieve it. Our friend Jonathan England has cracked the code on the how. On August 3rd, he is hosting the Off-Grid Dream Life event, where he'll show you the 4 steps to transform your vision of an idyllic eco-village into a reality. Imagine being a part of a sovereign community with its own food, water, shelter, energy, currency system possibly, allowing you to live in harmony with nature and with each other. No more bills, fresh clean water right out of the ground, organic food picked off the land daily, and surrounded with like-minded people who share your values. If this sounds like your dream, please register for this free virtual event by visiting offgriddreamlife.com or just head to the link in the show notes to learn more. So speaking of like the micro to macro, I feel like the example that you gave earlier of those corporate bros buying out the cannabis shop that you were working in is a perfect micro example of this sort of corporate, what do I want to call it? It's like corporate colonization of very intentional spaces and intentional healing spaces almost. And I mean, that's kind of happening in the holistic health space in general right now, where it's becoming highly corporatized because a lot of people are interested in holistic health, right? But it's especially scary, if you want to call it that, in the cannabis space, because it seems like the examples of this corporate colonization sort of taking over these mom and pop cannabis shops is happening all across the country at the same time as the increase in legalization and a complete reversal of sentiments surrounding weed, which I'm sure, and I don't want to speak for you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, a piece of you is like, yes, like this should have been legal the whole time. Like how stupid this idea to make a plant that occurs in earth that is created by God, all the things you said illegal, that's just absurd. And at the same time, you always have to wonder the intentions of government, especially as it ties in with corporatism and what's going on there. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Dude, a lot of thoughts, bro. So, think of it this way, right? I imagine all the listeners in your show will resonate with this, right? The government is never out for your health. They never care about you, right? They are a business, right? So anything they're doing, quite literally, right? They are a corporation. So anything they're doing, right, under the guise of, you know what? Like, I think Joe Biden's statement or whatever is so cringy. He's like, cannabis shouldn't be illegal anymore. Shouldn't be a Schedule 1. The fact that, like, people are like, yeah, it's getting rescheduled to Schedule 3. I'm like, guys, think about the fact that the internet is a thing now. We now are understanding cannabis's role in curing cancer. We're now aware of how much the endocannabinoid system plays a role in our well-being and all of these things. And they're still saying it belongs in a schedule, right? It is completely absurd. Now, second of all, the fact that it's been in Schedule 1 for so long is also hilarious. And I recommend people look this up too. The fact that Schedule 1, what Schedule 1 articulates is that whatever things are in there have no medicinal value whatsoever, right? Now, the funny thing is, cannabis has been scheduled as a Schedule 1 for years and years, but at the same time, the same government that tells you cannabis has no medical value owns a patent on cannabis as a neuroprotectant. So what they're saying is cannabis isn't medical except for how it is medical with the patent we own on it. So again, the reason I mention these things is because, again, for your listeners, I'm sure they're already well down this rabbit hole. But once again, how we do anything is how we do everything. An establishment, a corporation that will lie about that, where else are they lying? This is why it's so important to start using discernment. Discernment is the ultimate muscle to wield in this lifetime. Now, when it comes to the MSOs, the multi-state organizers taking over a lot of the thing, the cannabis industry right now is hurting hard, right? Because basically what's happening is there's no real standard for cannabis other than how pretty is it and what's the THC. Mm-hmm. So what's happening is people are growing with chemical salts, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, plant growth regulators, PGRs, all these things, whatever will make it look awesome. And the analogy here is like, think about people that do steroids, right? Like, sure, they're going to have huge muscles, but like, how are their organs, right? Like, how is their back knee, right? Like things like that. Can they get an erection? Things that are really important, but to the naked eye, if you didn't have any context or steroids, you'd be like, wow, that guy looks like a Greek god,
Right.
Not to, think about the fact that he can't even get a hard dick,
Right,
So,
right.
so at the end of the day, the same thing is happening with cannabis, but most people, because again, most people don't even understand organic food and the importance of that yet. Like we live in a bubble, right?
Totally
like where
do.
people are aware of that, but you go to like, Ohio, right? When I drive out to different music festivals and things like that, you can't find fucking anything healthy on the way out there. Like you have to bring your own food. It's like trying to find a gas station in the desert. It just doesn't exist, right? So basically what's happening is that all the people that are in cannabis for the right reason are not able to afford to be in the cannabis industry. Because like what happened in California, where there was legacy growers that had been doing this for generations and generations. And with the Proposition 215 that passed in 96 or 95, one or the other, they were able to sell to dispensaries. The feds would still fuck with them and try to raid them, but they had pretty much good freedom and they could make good money and things like that. But a lot of those people, they don't want the corporate life. They don't want to have to take out loans. They don't want to have to fucking do all this tax bullshit and all these things. That's not who they are. I mean, who the fuck wants to do that, right? We of us that have done it have just thugged it out through it, to try to figure out some way to do it. But a lot of these people don't want to do it. Guess who's okay with doing that? The same corporate people that are into finance and real estate or whatever else, right? The people that have hedge funds, right? People like that. So what's happening is they're coming in and buying up all of the land and everything like that. And what's happening is the consumer is not aware of what high quality cannabis truly is because there hasn't been a standard set yet. So what I always say to everyone, right? Any mom and pop shop listening is that the reason why it's so important to grow organically, to use things like Korean natural farming, to utilize biogeometry, etc., is not only because it helps the cannabis tremendously, we can get into exactly what it does, but the fact that it's the only way you're going to stand out. You can't do that, right? Like you can't grow cannabis of that high quality in a big scale operation. You just can't do it. Straight up. I've seen
same thing with growing organic food. You can't grow organic food that's high quality at that scale.
Exactly.
That's just the reality, especially because I think so many of us miss out how do I put this? Hold to be less important the intentions in which you're growing your stuff. Yeah. And when you're growing at scale like that, the amount of true intention that you're able to put into your plant is diminished. That's just the reality.
Definitely, dude. Combined with that too, that most grow hands, You know, and again, like there are some amazing ones out there, et cetera. But typically, right, if we look at like, you know, best case scenario, they're probably not aware of holistic health. They probably don't meditate. They don't do breath work, et cetera. And that's not a judgment. But like what people don't understand about plant medicines is that they're conscious beings. Plants are all conscious, regardless if they're psychedelic or not. But when you're working with a psychedelic, there's a real reason why when you go to indigenous or shamanistic cultures, there's one person that works with all the medicine, and that's the shaman, because he's separate from the rest of the tribe most of the time. So he can make sense of, am I putting anything negative by accident, right, into this medicine? He needs to be a clear vessel to make sure his negativity or anything that he may be bringing, he or she, is not getting uploaded into that medicine. It's like Jedi mind tricks in a way, right?
It totally
You have
is.
to be a very high level of consciousness to understand, like, ooh, I'm feeling this way. I'm not going to walk into that grow room right now with this energy. I'm going to like spend 5 minutes just clearing my mind. Like, doesn't have to be something crazy. You don't have to be a genius to do this stuff, but like basic things that most people don't do. Like, how many people meditate? Like,
Right.
you know, in our groups, sure, a lot. But like you go to like, again, Ohio, and you ask the average person, they're like, meta what? You know,
Right.
like they don't even get it, you know?
Or I'm not doing that witchcraft shit.
Exactly,
Like, that's what my
exactly, you
family
know?
members say.
And so, yeah, exactly. And so they're walking around with all these traumas in them and things like that, and they're projecting it onto these plants, and the plants take that in, you know?
Right.
And again, like,
If you don't believe that, read The Secret Life of Plants. Like
Exactly.
that tells you all you need to know about how much of an impact we have on plants.
100%, dude. You can even look up, you know, when I first started talking about this, people were like, oh, it's so woo-woo and things like that. And, you know, again, like, you know, for people that are still in a left brain mentality that have never done a psychedelic, there's just no way to explain it, right? Like there's this whole world. We only see 4% of visible reality, which means 96% of what science knows to be there, we can't see.
Right.
And then people are like, I can't see it with my eyes. And I'm like, do you want me to break down why that's not a really good theory, right? A really good way to weigh that? So at the end of the day, right, if you look at Joe Patitucci's plant wave system, he's actually made this a thing. I saw him on Aubrey a couple of years ago where he can hook electrodes up to plants, and he can actually hear the songs they sing when someone walks into the room projecting emotions of love versus projections of hate. And if you look at Masaru Emoto's work and you look at what water does, and then you look at what plants are constituted with, a lot of water, same as us, right? It doesn't take a genius to figure out there's a correlation there, right?
Right.
And also, you know, again, when you're around plants and they're sick or whatever, you can just tell, man, you know,
Right.
It's funny how in today's world, intuition is like, dude, that's so woo-woo, right? But those same people, and this is how I pattern interrupt them. And for anyone listening, maybe has a parent or a friend or whatever that kind of pulls this with you, right? If you resonate with this, you can bring this up to them, right? I have people ask me often, like, dude, that's completely woo-woo. You're silly. You know, what do you mean this energy? That doesn't exist, things like that. And I'm like, okay, let's go with your theory, right? This doesn't exist. So let me ask you this. Do you love someone in your life? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, do you love 2 people? They're like, yeah. And I'm like, all right, how many units of love do you have for each one of them? They're like, well, I can't measure it. I'm like, oh, you can't measure it, but you still know it exists, right? So don't you think there may be other things like that maybe you don't have a conscious awareness yet of, but that still exist?
And this is the problem of being steeped in materialism too.
Yeah, and reductionism.
Right.
You know?
100%.
Like I don't care about the real thing. Again, we're seeing it with cannabis. I don't care about the plant. I want to break it down into individual components and strengthen it and do all these things. And again, that's not bad inherently, but if you think you're going to outsmart nature, you're doing a fool's errand. Like you can have your fun little science experiments, but it's never going to beat what God created.
100%.
Ever. It's already perfected.
So when it comes to this highly corporatized weed, if you will, that is just increasing, I don't know, maybe exponentially at this point, who knows, especially as there's sentiments, like I said, about legalization, et cetera, et cetera. At the least, that corporate money-making, just get people high as high as we possibly can, that's the intention being put into the weed. And then they're being grown with these horrific practices. You're basically smoking poison at this point. Aside from that, do you think there's any other play at hand or intention coming from the government and the corporate world? Okay, what else in addition to that? Because that's already bad enough.
Yeah.
That's already bad enough.
And again, like, you know, again, it's fractionalized, right? Like, you know, most people don't know meditating is important. So it's not like their fault. They're at the dispensary and they're projecting emotions of hate, things like that. But it's things for the person that's consuming the medicine, especially your listeners that are highly aware, right? Like for those of us that live this lifestyle, that eat high quality food, drink high quality spring water, a lot of us just don't know, like, oh shit, we got into factory farming, right? And we're actually doing, we're we're connecting with cannabis or tobacco or whatever that's actually factory farm, that's out of alignment with our ethos, right? So that's why it's important to understand. And it's not to put fear in anyone like you're going to die or whatever, but it's just like, you know, a lot of people that are experiencing a lot of anxiety and paranoia and things like that. The other thing, right, and this is like not paradoxical truths, but again, like there's multiple truths and being held at the same time, that yes, cannabis is a mirror. It mirrors back what's in your own nervous system, but it also mirrors back what's been uploaded into it, you know? And so you have to also have discernment of like, is this mine that I'm feeling, or is this just something that's in the plan? And I talk about having to pay the cannabis tax when you connect with that cannabis, because if you're going to be able to benefit from it, it's almost like you have to go through the clouds and all the thunderstorms to get to the sunny day on the other side. Whereas when you connect with cannabis, it's grown organically, like mine, with biogeometry, grown with love, it's just a beautiful sunny day, right? Or if you want to think about it like night, beautiful night sky that you can just go soar around in. So here's what I think is going on. And there's a guy that I recommend everyone check out. You got to get this guy on the show, dude. Robert Forte.
Robert Forte.
He is amazing, dude. This guy... So funny, dude. Ben Stewart. I started podcasting with him.
I love Ben
and,
Stewart.
Dude, he's
Such
a fucking man, dude. Shout out to Ben Stewart, dude.
Yeah,
You're such a gangster. And he hit me up one day and was like, hey, man, I just had 2 friends move back to your area. They're really good friends. You should hang out with them. I'm like, all right, cool. So I meet Jill and Madhava. Have you heard of Madhava? He was on Paul's podcast. Another guy you got to get on. He's either a virologist.
I'm literally writing these down.
Yeah. I think it's MADHAVA. And he's a ridiculously high up scientist. I think he's either an epidemiologist or virologist, right? And he's totally on our side, right? And he has all the science to back it up, right? And so he's a great red pill for a lot of people that are like, well, he's a scientist. You know, he checks out on the institutional things that I think are high and mighty, right?
Right.
But anyway, he hits me up and he's like, yeah, they just moved back to your area. So I'm like, sick. So I go up and see him. They're awesome. We have a great time. So a couple of months later, they're like, hey, we're having a small party at our house. You got to come up and you got to meet our friend Robert, right? They don't tell me anything about him. I'm like, all right, cool. So I come up and I'm hanging out with them and I see Robert and I'm like, hey, I'm going to go make a bag in the volcano, right? And he's like, hey, I'm going to come with you, right? So I don't know anything about this guy, right? So we go over to the volcano, we start making a bag, and he's like, you know, talking about like, oh yeah, you know, when I used to hang out with Aldous Huxley, oh yeah, I knew Terrence McKenna, and like he's dropping these names and I'm like, dude, what's your story, bro? Like, you know, like we're like hitting a bag and I'm like, tell me more, bro. You know, like I'm intrigued now. So he starts telling me that he was literally there in the entire psychedelic revolution. He was very good friends with Timothy Leary. He was very good friends with Alexander Shulgin, Aldous Huxley, Albert Hoffman, Terrence and Dennis McKenna, Rick Doblin, all these people.
Wow.
He was one of the first people to try MDMA, right? In like the very early 80s. And, you know, he actually talks about how Rick Doblin actually tipped the DEA off, I don't know if he meant to, about Molly because it was legal, right? No one knew what it was. He remembers going to like UC Berkeley and he asked Alexander Shulgin, like, how do you make this? And he asked him, like, do you have any more? And he's like, no, but I can teach you how to make it. So he's like, then I met 2 chemistry students. And we went up to UC Berkeley and we made like a kilo of MDMA back in like the early 80s. And they were at Esalen. And it was like a very hush-hush thing, and they would gift it to people, and he would always tell people like, hey, let me know your feedback, you know, write a little piece of paper and tell me what you do. And they were doing all these under-the-cuff experiments, and then Rick Doblin apparently, and again, I wasn't there, so I'm not trying to talk shit, but he somehow, the DEA found out about MDMA, and he's actually the one that got it classified. And I think he's now working to repair that karma, you know, and he's doing a lot of great work with maps and everything.
There's a lot of stigma around MDMA too. And that's the other thing, unfortunately, because it is illegal, inherently a lot of sketchy people who just want to make a buck off of people who, you know, want to do something illegal because it's cool will present what they're calling as MDMA, but it's not actually MDMA. Yeah,
it's methadone, or it's different amphetamines, or it's you know, even MDA like SAS, or it fucking has fentanyl in it and you die.
Right,
you know, you think you're gonna go have a fun time at the rave and you die.
And that's happening a lot more now too.
Yeah, and it's not because of anything else other than prohibition. Because still, and I don't think the government believes this, and we'll get into what Robert said in a second, but you know, there's this long held belief that I really think this is all part of their play. I don't imagine they're this stupid, but that if you make things prohibited, people won't do them. It's the dumbest fucking ideology ever, dude. Like literally when you're a teenager and you get told don't do that, what's the first thing you want to do? Whatever you got told not to do. The best way to do it is to normalize it and say, hey, there's this thing. Here's why you utilize it. Here's the dangers of it. Here's how to be safe with it. Make your own choices.
I think at the least what they're doing is they're making these things illegal, so then they can say, oh, well, there's a lot of people doing this, so they're going to do it anyway, so maybe we should take control over this substance and regulate it. And then they have their stamp of approval versions of it.
Yeah, outlaw the natural, monopolize the synthetic.
Exactly.
You know, and the other thing too is when you make something illegal that you know people are going to want to do, then you can arrest them and you can put them in prison and you can have them become legal slaves. And no one bats an eyelash. And now these private prisons bought out by soap companies, whatever, can get legal slave labor. No one thinks anything of it. And at the end of the day, all of these, like we know, are statutory laws. They're not fucking anything. They're not actual law, right? You're not hurting anyone. You're not disturbing the peace. You're not stealing anything. All you're doing is the most human thing you can possibly do. There's never been a time in history where humans were not shifting their consciousness. And if you actually look at the times where they've tried to prohibit that, they're some of the darkest times in human history.
Makes sense.
You know, because again, when people start, you know, living from the ego, a lot of distortions can happen. Like Paul Levy talks about Watiko, right? Like all these things are fucking real. And I think a lot of people don't get it, you know, because they just don't know what they don't know. And then there's other people like you and I that are aware we don't know anything, right? And so anything is possible, you know? And that's the big shift is that like, you know, wise is the man who knows he does not know, you know? So that's why I tell everything. Like I only know this subjectively for myself. And maybe some people are certainly like, this doesn't resonate at all. Cool, it's not for you. Maybe some people are like, it resonates with me. Cool, it's for you, you know? But again, this is what my experience has been. And when you talk to Robert, right? So Robert was there through all of this, right? And his whole thing is MK Ultra never ended. It just went underground and it changed shape, right? Kind of like a shapeshifter. We know there's some of those in the government, some lizard beings. And so, you know, what he believes is that there was a time where they were creating legal slaves through private prisons and things like that because they were trying to figure out how do we take these psychedelics and make them actually work for us for mind control and things like that. And if you read A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, you start reading about this substance they call soma, who whenever the government starts to do things that people try to revolt over, they just dose the whole population with this thing called soma where they fuck like bunnies and listen to music and the government can do whatever they want. And so now I want you to think about the last 80 to 100 years just in cannabis alone, let alone Molly and all these things, where the whole depiction is it's stupid, it's dumb, it's whatever, it gets you fucked up, makes you feel better at the end of this shitty day, right? Where you're working this shitty job and you have no power to change it. And now all of a sudden they're like, hey guys, actually, cannabis is now getting legalized and whatever. And now being someone who worked at a dispensary and worked with at least 100 people a day coming through and them telling me like what they were there for, I'm telling you 100% honestly, most people that are there are just making maybe a healthier decision. Like, yeah, I don't drink anymore, so I'm just here to get my pre-rolls and forget about the day, dude, and just start it all over again tomorrow. And again, maybe it's a healthier choice than alcohol, but at the end of the day, they're still just surviving, you know, when in reality, they're completely unaware. They have all the keys inside of them especially with the support of this plant to remind them of those keys and help them wake up to their own power and realize, I don't need to do any of this shit. I can learn how to not pay taxes. I can learn how to take care of my friends and family. And also when I connect with psychedelics and get back to my essence, I don't need the biggest house. I don't need to be keeping up with the Joneses. All I need is to be around my family, take care of my own, spread love to the world, and have a good fire where we can laugh, you know, and have some high quality food. That's all I need, you know, and that's extremely damaging to the powers that shouldn't be. So what they've done now is they've commandeered it to be this dumb thing that people don't know. It's the ultimate connection medicine. But you need not look farther than Bob Marley, bro. Have you seen the new Bob Marley movie?
No, is it good?
We watched it the other night at Aaron's, and I've always felt a pull towards Bob Marley. Before I ever connected with cannabis, dude, I was a Just Say No guy, but I had a poster on my wall that said, when you smoke the herb, it reveals you to yourself. And literally it was a premonition, dude, because that's one of the ideas I got in terms of how I describe how cannabis works. It's a mirror, right? It only mirrors back what's already inside of you. And that's why it comes with a great responsibility, because if you can't handle that, you're not fit to work with that medicine yet. You haven't reached the echelon where you're going to be able to actually utilize that as a powerful plant medicine and spiritual aid and ally. You're just going to end up using it as a substance, right? You're an infant, essentially. If you can't even take accountability for your own internal state, you have no place in plant medicine. That's my personal opinion. Now, again, I was in plant medicine before I had that. I fucked around. I found out, right? I had some very hellish experiences, and I'm grateful for those. But I don't know if everyone can handle those, you know? Like, I mean, I have friends that have gone very deep in psychedelics and have gotten fucked up, but it's not the fault of the psychedelic, right? It's the fault of the person who didn't do enough research beforehand and fucked around with something that is extremely powerful, something that can change your entire life, your entire lease on consciousness. And people just don't think of it that way.
Yeah.
because it's normalized.
Well, and especially for the people who are using it in a very unconscious way that are carrying their own demons, so to speak, I think the likelihood that they are purchasing cannabis or other psychedelics or plant medicines from people who are also putting, their own demons into it, if you will, then their demons are going to be amplified themselves, but they're also smoking demons, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why they're resonating with that stuff too, right? Because, law of resonance, right? You'll
Totally.
attract what you are, not what you want, but what you are.
What you are.
And so, again, like, I was talking to Lucas about this, because he's like, yeah, dude, I had to get sober years ago because I was smoking all this demonic weed. And I mean, like, again, you think about it like, we understand what happens with meat now, right? Why do none of us eat factory farm meat? Well, obviously we don't support animal cruelty and things like that. But in addition to that, if you eat that meat and it has stress and anxiety, it gets uploaded into your nervous system. Human beings overall just haven't realized that plants are also conscious. Like there's this whole thing of like, well, I don't kill anything. I'm a vegetarian or vegan. It's like, guys, plants are conscious too. They might have a different level of consciousness, but everything is alive. The best thing you can do is make the best choices. It doesn't matter what diet you have. I'm not here to preach one or the other. I don't fall into fads or diets or whatever, but at the end of the day, be as kind as you possibly can and you will reap the benefits. It's the golden rule, dude. You get taught it in kindergarten, but it's just an intellectual concept that never gets embodied in most people. Didn't for me for a fucking long time until I got into psychedelics and I started stripping away all this fucking nonsense that I had piled onto me about who I thought I should be. And again, my parents did fucking great. It wasn't any fault of them. There's just so much of this shit in their lineage, dude. So much of it in their DNA. And then so much of we get exposed to through friends whose parents are different.
Right.
Again, it's almost unavoidable. And I think it's very beneficial in a way too, because what a great hero's journey, dude, right? Like think about and for every human listening right now, right? Like maybe you're hearing this and, maybe you hear other things that are on your show or whatever. And maybe you start thinking doom and gloom, like, oh my God, whatever. Dude, think about it this way, dude. Would Luke Skywalker have ever been Luke Skywalker without Darth Vader, right? And this is why I love what Aaron talks about. The negative polarity, the powers that shouldn't be, the Bill Gates, the Klaus Schwabs. If it weren't for them, we wouldn't be able to positively polarize, right? We wouldn't be able to live the lives we're living. And so I'm very grateful for their existence because they're also God, right? They may have forgotten it a little bit more than we have, right? But they're playing a very important role.
They're acting as the catalyst for us. I say that so much when it comes to COVID. I'm grateful. Was it a chaotic, traumatic experience? Yes. My childhood trauma, I had a fucked up childhood. Was it chaotic? It's all relative. I'm sure there's people who've had way worse shit than me, but relatively speaking, in the US, I had a fucked up childhood.
Yeah.
I am so grateful for that fucked up childhood.
Yeah.
Is there still pieces of it that come up in me that I have to work through sometimes? Of course there is, bro. But I am so grateful for that experience because it acted as a catalyst to make me who I am now.
Definitely. And you know what the other great thing about, darkness as it's perceived or challenge or trauma or anything is that it helps you relate to others because, our challenges may look different, right? Our childhoods may look different, et cetera. But when you say you have childhood trauma, I can relate it to my own experience and understand and have empathy and compassion for you.
Yeah.
And so in a weird way, right? Like these challenges or this darkness or whatever you want to call it, shadow stuff, it actually can be a great connector, and that's one of the things that cannabis and psychedelics can do. I mean, look what's happening with MDMA and PTSD, right? What is that ability? It's being able to take something that allows you to change your story or your perspective or perception of an event that already happened. It allows you to time travel. It allows you to become the creator of your reality and realize that events are just events, right? Why can someone go through an absolutely hellish experience like Viktor Frankl, for instance, right? Who went to the fucking Holocaust, right? And the concentration camps. Why was he able to come out of that with such a positive mindset and write books that have inspired people still to this day? It's like the same event that other people just completely gave up and died at, and obviously horrible things happen there. But the difference is perspective. And that's what people don't understand. Quantum physics says the same thing. Nothing's objective. Everything is subjective. So again, like the biggest responsibility we have is to make sure we're telling ourselves the most empowering story possible around anything that's happened. Sure, my dad passed away of cancer. It was very hard to see him go through brain cancer and have the person that I had loved and grown up with change in front of me, not recognize who I am, all these things. But the reason why I'm able to talk about it today and have it inspire me is because I understood that my dad is infinite, that he was playing out a certain role to help me evolve, right? To help me realize how precious this experience of life is. That one of the reasons I love cannabis so much, and again, I benefited from so many different psychedelics, but one of the reasons I love it the most is because if we believe we're infinite beings, which not everyone has to believe that, but I choose to believe it, if we believe we've been wherever there is, right, for infinity, and we've never been born, we'll never die, then why are we trying to leave this experience so much, right? Because we're only here for a fucking moment in time, a blink of an eye, dude. And what cannabis to me does is it connects me more to my humanness. It does allow me to see behind the scene, but it really connects me to the earth, right? The God on this plane. It really connects me to my neighbors, right? It really connects me to my other human being friends. And in that, it's the most spiritual experience, because think about it. What are we all? We're all reflections of one another walking each other home. What is the earth? It's also us. It's all alive, right? The lessons are all around us, dude. We don't need textbooks. We don't need any of this stuff. And cannabis specifically helps me realize that. You know, mushrooms, LSD, MDMA is different. They're all beautiful. I'm not here to make a hierarchy, but I am here to allow cannabis to rise back into the conversation with these other medicines, because it does stand toe to toe with any of these medicines. And I think that's one of the biggest things and thirst traps that people have been prohibited against, you know, understanding. Because think about it too, Alec, right? Like, we know how beneficial combo can be, or bufo or ayahuasca or any of these medicines. But if we are going to go through if we need to go through a very quick change in humanity to be able to allow this planet to continue to positively polarize and allow the powers that shouldn't be to not, you know, negatively polarize the planet. And, you know, if meteors are going to come and all this shit that can happen, we don't have thousands of years to do this. We need it quick. And that's what psychedelics can do, right? They can definitely fuck you up if you're not willing, if you're not understanding them, right? That's why it's like a jetpack, right? If you know how to use a jetpack, it'll get you to California quicker. If not, you'll fucking die, right? So, you know, again, at the end of the day, it's not about just like everyone takes psychedelics. It's like, no, we need education around it. Right. We need people to understand
Intention
it
too.
Exactly.
And not using it as an escape. You know, I sort of, I guess, pride myself in this, you could say, is that for the first time this year, I felt called to do ayahuasca. I have not sat with ayahuasca yet.
Same,
but for the
bro.
first time this, really?
Same, bro. It's the only medicine besides iboga that I have not sat with.
Ayahuasca, I have not sat with before.
We should go together, bro.
I actually would
awesome,
love,
dude.
Dude, let's do that. I'm serious.
Hell
That'd be
bro.
incredible. Henna Maria, who...
dude. I heard about Henna. I was talking to Edith Ubuntu Chan, and she was telling me she just went to a ceremony with her.
We'll talk about it after this. Okay, there we go. But my point in that is, I saw a lot of people in the conscious community sprint to ayahuasca to fix their problems. And I was like, okay, that's clearly not the right intention going into this. And a lot of those people did have really dark, negative experiences and almost like schizophrenic breaks after sitting with ayahuasca, coming into it with that intention. And I think that's the whole point here, is that, yes, I think the world could benefit from these psychedelics with the right intention and education, and also sitting with someone or consuming a plant that was cultivated by someone who puts a lot of intention into it. And that's actually what I wanted to talk to you about next.
Well, dude, let me say one last thing on this, like, because it's the perfect kind of like cherry on top for this. This is why I'm so big on cannabis, man, because think about the idea of like ayahuasca, you got to go to a jungle, right? I mean, you might be able to like go down the street. I don't really recommend that, right? You got to like really make sure you're working with the right people. But like, you know, it costs usually at least $5,000. You got to leave your family for 2 to 3 weeks, right? You got to take time off of work, supposedly, or possibly as well, and all these things. And then I want you to think about, if we need more and more people to tap into this, and we think about the average human being, especially just in America, they don't have that ability to like take time off, go down to the jungle, spend $5,000. Right. First of all, also, like, they're not really at the level of ayahuasca overall. And also, it's just not very practical, right, for them. Cannabis, on the other hand, most people are normalized to it. Every archetype of human being is using it. Cops, firemen, lawyers, teachers, young people, old people, men, women, everyone's utilizing cannabis. Imagine if we just taught everyone, hey, just say what you want from it before you do it. Very low barrier for entry. And how many people would click into, whoa, that did something? And how many of those people would then start thinking the same way I talked about earlier, like, what the fuck just happened? I wonder what would happen if I did that with the sex I have, and with my kids every morning, and with my job each day when I go to work. I'm going to have a good day today, right? Like, what would the ripple effect of that be? Coupled with that, the fact that they can grow a plant in their backyard. It's the people's plant, dude. It's the one that any of us can learn how to work with very minimal effort. And we can grow the exact strains we want. We can commune with the plant. We can grow with cannabis, which is why I called the course that, because it's not just about growing cannabis, it's about growing alongside it, right? Because you can learn a lot by growing a plant. You know, when a plant is a seedling, you can't water it very hard with a gallon of water, right? It's fragile. Well, where in your life are you a seedling right now? And are you treating yourself like a seedling or a full-grown sapling, right? Like, you know, again, like how are you viewing yourself? Because we are the exact same. How we do anything is how we do everything. So I wanted to add that in there, man, because that's one of the things I really believe cannabis can do. And I really feel like the powers that shouldn't be, right? They're legalizing, right, all across the world with this idea that like they're going to numb people out. When in reality, all we have to do is just start showing people how to be conscious with it. And all of a sudden that whole plan for them gets turned upside down. And I've seen it in all the clients I work with, man. You start working on their relationship with cannabis, everything else starts falling in line, because when you start adding intention to cannabis, doing ceremonies, integrating, starting to realize that like, hey, depending on what time you connect with cannabis at night, you can impact your REM sleep, right? And people start understanding like, wow, like there's a lot of things I can do to make myself feel better. All of a sudden they're like, dude, I've been meditating for 2 weeks straight now because I just can't imagine living without it. Dude, I'm doing this too. Dude, I'm going to leave the job just like I went through. Like your whole life starts shifting. And it's not because of cannabis, it's because you're taking accountability for your own inner state. You're not blaming the world anymore, you know? So it really can change your whole life, dude, you know, if it's done consciously and intentionally.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
What's even more powerful, I'd imagine, is being able to grow your own cannabis, wherein you're putting intention and into the way that it's grown and projecting whatever literal like intention you want to bring about in reality into the plant and then consuming it in a number of ways. I'd imagine that just goes exponential on co-creating.
Dude, 100%. I mean, one of the first things I do, probably the first thing I do, and I teach this in the Grow program, whenever I'm going to plant a seed, and I didn't invent this, I got this from Native Americans and other indigenous cultures, but what they do is they take the seeds and they put them in their mouth. And they inoculate them with their own microbiome. And my theory along with that, and they talk a little bit about this, but my own theory is that the same way that when a woman is pregnant, right, like Selena's pregnant right now, when someone is pregnant, the baby starts to understand its mother and father by the sound of its voice, right, before it's born. Well, my theory is that it works the same with seeds, right? Like, you know, if you're a high vibrational being, you know, shameless plug, if you're highly optimized, right, my business name, if you're doing these things and you inoculate that seed goes, this person's safe. They fucking get it. They're going to take good care of me. Now, when you're actually growing that plant, you're making sure, right? Like what a good pattern interrupt when you walk into your grow room, like, how am I feeling? Maybe taking a little bit of the day in with me, right? So I'm going to go get clear. I go in there. Dude, I swear, dude, when I'm in that room, I'm completely sober, right? Completely sober. I haven't had any cannabis, sometimes in days, right? Even weeks. I go in there, I start getting ideas. And this is what I start talking about, that, you know, when you start growing cannabis plants and you start communing with them more than just connecting with the plant, like in a inhalation or ingestion way, you start really tapping into the frequency that cannabis is. And the same way that, like, you know, how long have you and Kylie been together?
16 years.
Okay. So
8 years of marriage, 16 years total though.
Okay, perfect. So this is a perfect description of this, right? Because let's say you're out somewhere, right? And you're like, fuck, you know, I really wonder what Kylie would say, right? And you try to call her and she doesn't answer. You could probably imagine what she would tell you,
100%.
right? Because you know her well enough. Well, when you start to understand cannabis and you start to work with it enough, you can call on that even in the sober state. So now what I teach people is, you know, it's not like you're high without being high, but you get the benefits of being high. And that's one of the things I've found shifts for most people right away when they start getting into consciously connecting with the plant, is it's less about the high and more about what the high brings forth. So it's more like, what's the right dose for clairvoyance to come out rather than how high can I get? It's like, what's the right dose to have a conversation with my partner about maybe some heavy subject? What's the right dose to be able to relieve trauma? Like it becomes less about the effect, you know, like I don't even care about the effect anymore. I care about what it brings out of me and then how I can access those things even in the sober state. Because what cannabis does is it opens you up to the infinite possibilities within yourself. And other things can do this too, right? Like it's not like cannabis is this one thing. You know, there are endless rivers that lead to the same sea. And what I want everyone to know is that there's no right or wrong way to get there. The only wrong way is the one that tells you it's the only way. That's why I always say cannabis is not for everyone. You know, if this doesn't resonate with you, great. It's not your medicine. That's awesome. Go find your own medicine. You're still going to get to the same spot, but it's time to realize that cannabis is one of these rivers. 100%, you know?
I love that.
Yeah.
So talk to me about your grow process, because you brought up Korean natural farming, you've brought up biogeometry and a few other things, obviously organic practices. I just want to give people an idea of the intention that you put into your grow process.
Yeah, dude. I love talking about this stuff. It's one of my favorite things. Like I'm a nerd for cultivation, dude. Like out of all the areas of cannabis, you know, spirituality is probably tied with it, but out of all the areas, cultivation and spirituality are my two favorites. So when it comes to cultivating, there's infinite different ways you could do it, but for me, I understand, like Jack Kruse says, does nature make mistakes? Not in my opinion, right? So for me, the best thing I can do is try to replicate nature as close as possible. Now, where I live in Boston, you can't grow outdoor all year long. And so I also understand the negative influences of EMFs and radio waves and electricity. So I was like, well, how do I have my cake and eat it too and make sure the cake's gluten-free? Well, what I do with that, right? How I do that is I work with a system like biogeometry that allows you to have your cake, have technology, and eat it too, for it not to be detrimental, right? So what I look to do is mimic a forest floor as close as possible with no-till gardening with living soil. So I mix my own soils. I put different things in there: peat moss, pumice, earthworm castings, compost, BioLive, crustacean meal, biochar, basalt, all these different things, malted barley powder, and I mix all the soil up, and then I put them usually in 20 to 30 gallon pots. When I'm outside, I'm growing in beds because you want the mycorrhizal networks all connected. Inside, I like to do pots just because I'm on a second floor, so I can't do beds because then I have to do automated watering, and then I could flood the second floor of my house. So
it's cool outside too, because there's something about getting a dose of the land that you're on, and that being ingrained into the plant.
Dude, like that's the whole idea of KNF, and we'll get to that in a second too, of why that's so beneficial. But again, like once I make that soil and I put it in the pot, when I harvest a plant, I'm not going to like dump that soil out and start over or try to till it, because like when's the last time you went in the forest and saw like someone tilling the forest floor? It doesn't happen, right? So once again, human beings are making more work for themselves for no fucking reason, right? All you're doing by tilling is slowing down the process, because now all those networks, those mycorrhizal networks, have to rebuild themselves, right? So it's one of those things where it's just like, guys, it can actually be easier than that, right? So what I do is I'll grow in the same soil for years, dude, and it just gets better and better and better with age. And what I'll do is every harvest, I'll throw down a little more compost. I mulch all my leaves into it, so I really try to mimic the forest floor. As my leaves start dying, they fall into the pot, they decompose, they start feeding the microbes. The microbes then take the nutrients and make them soluble from their insoluble state. Then the exudates, the plant's roots, release those sugars that the microbes really want. They trade. It all works in perfect harmony, right? Just like nature. Then what I do is I add in Korean natural farming, because Korean natural farming to me is like the stem cells of the nature world, right? Of the natural world. Where stem cells, right, like you can pull them out of your hip and inject them into your knee, right, or something like that. Well, the stem cells of the earth are microbes, right? Like they're what create health in the soil. So what you can do is the cornerstone, or the main course, if you will, of Korean natural farming is something called IMO, indigenous microorganism. And the whole idea is, if you go into a hydroponic store or a grow store, you'll see all these products, Mammoth Pea, Max Microbe, Fish Shit, all these microbe products. And at face value, it sounds like a great idea. Like, oh, I'm growing in soil, I'm going to dose it with microbes, should be great. Well, the challenge is that microbes don't survive in a habitat that is not natural to them. So let's say that you're buying like, something like Mammoth Pea, right? And I think off the top of my head, that company's from Colorado. So like that's a higher elevation. And now I'm going to use them in Boston. Well, a lot of them are going to die off because they just don't thrive in that kind of environment, right? That altitude and things like that. Whereas if I can go outside of my house and I can take, a wooden box, right, that I make myself, I can put some screen on both sides, metal screen, so no critters get into it. I cook some white rice a little bit too much till it's al dente. I put that in there as a perfect host for the microbes to go on. And then I find some maybe dead wood around me with some fungal hyphae, signs right around it. I place that box there, and depending on the time of year, in like 5 to 10 days, you'll go back, and if you did it right, you should have all this white fuzz growing on your rice. Now that makes what's called IMO 1. IMO is a 5-stage process. You don't need to go through all 5 stages.
So it's a byproduct of the rice with the fungus, essentially.
Yeah, it creates a host for the microbes to prosper on, right? So now that's IMO 1, right? Now you want to take that home, and you're going to combine that. Say you weigh all the rice and the microbes, and it's like 160 grams. Well, you're going to combine that 1-to-1 with brown sugar to suspend the microbes for continuing to boost, and that's called IMO 2. Now, if you're a small gardener like I am, or maybe many people listening, that's really the last stage of IMO you need to go to, right? From there, if you were like, if you had a big farm, you'd then take it from IMO 2, and you'd take whatever grain you're using, barley or whatever, You'd make a big pile of barley, maybe like half as big as this rug, and then you dose it with IMO2, and then that would start breeding, right? And then you'd get a bigger and bigger concentration. Then you move on to compost, and then finally your own native soil. Then you'd take a tractor and spread it all throughout your yard. And what you're doing is, through this process, you're boosting insanely the microbes that are natural to your area. And like we already talked about, the microbes' role is your plant cannot take up nutrients if they're insoluble, right? They're not able to be used. And so they need the microbes, right, to take those nutrients, create solubility so the plant can actually use the nutrients. So now imagine what happens when you let nature do its thing, right? You're not trying to make nature better. It's already perfected. You're just taking what's already perfect, concentrating it, and then giving it back to your land. And what happens is, you know, a lot of these chemical salt gardeners, once again, they think they outsmart nature, and they're like, oh, I know what plants need, you know, like Idiocracy. I'm surprised we're not feeding them Gatorade yet. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we know what they need. In veg, they need nitrogen, they need some CalMag, and, you know, flower.
Yeah, you break it down to nitrogen, phosphorus,
and potassium, you know, like,
exactly.
Again, reductionism mindset.
Right.
Well, you know, again, plants are choosing what nutrients they need on a microsecond basis. So is it better to think that you think you know exactly what that plant needs when it needs it? Or would you rather assume that you're never going to outsmart what that plant's doing? You're never going to be faster than what that plant needs. So the best thing you can do is create the best microbe health so that all these nutrients are available whenever your plant wants them, and let your plant do its thing. So then on top of that, with KNF, you can make different products like fermented plant juice, fermented fruit juice, which are all ferments of different plants and fruits, right? Then you can also make Oriental Herbal Nutrient, which is 5 fermented herbs put together, great for the plant's immune system, water-soluble calcium, water-soluble potassium, all these different things, fish amino acids, right? You want to talk about vegetative growth, dude? For any grower out there, foliar feed FAA, fish amino acids on your plants and watch them go crazy, dude. This last harvest, I had leaves that were the biggest leaves I've ever seen in my life, dude. It was absolutely unreal. Dark, luscious green, dude. Thick stem walls, right? These plants are thriving, dude. They're just telling me through their experience, through their appearance, like, thank you, dude. You get it, you know? And so, again, for me, the best thing I can do is be the best steward I can. You know, that's my whole ethos when it comes to growing. That's why I teach everyone I teach is that you're never going to outsmart nature. The best thing you can do is work in union with it and be a co-creative process with nature. And if you do that, you're going to get rewarded very handsomely, you know? And so you start making all these products, which is super fun too, man. Think about with your kids, you're growing comfy or whatever. You're teaching them how to ferment their own things. You can drink these things. They're great for your own gut biome. You don't have to buy any of this stuff. And then what you do is, on top of that, considering the world we live in, then you add biogeometry in, because plants have a biofield just like we do, right? So if you understand the fact that the analogy I usually give for this is, imagine that you are preparing for a math test and you study really good, right? You do all the right things, which, you know, in this analogy would be like, you do the living soil, you're doing the Korean natural farming, right? But then maybe you're in a place like I am in Boston, right? You have to grow inside, or maybe you're in an urban city right around a bunch of 5G towers or whatever. And so you're unaware that what you're doing, right, when you go to this math test, is that someone is going to be screaming bloody murder in your ear the entire time you're there. No matter how well you studied, how well you're going to do on that test. You're going to fail it, right? Because you're just going to be like, I got to get the fuck out of here. That's what's happening with plants and us, right? And a lot of times we can't feel it, right? Because it's on a subtle level and most people aren't tapped in like that. So again, at the end of the day, if you start using biogeometry to mitigate a lot of those things, then the best part is you can have your Zoom, you can have all this technology, right? You can have all the things, but you get to have your cake, eat it too, and it's gluten-free. And I'll tell you, man, like when I first started growing with biogeometry.
So what do you do specifically for biogeometry?
Yeah, so I'll tell you exactly what I do. And anyone that's listening, take this around with it, dude. You know, like this is something that I tell everyone is open source. There's going to be things that probably other people teach me. It's help in normal
gardening. It's not even just about growing marijuana.
Exactly. And you don't need to make it crazy, right? Like biogeometry sells the cube and things like that. And I have all that in there. But I had a buddy that, you know, actually made some shapes out of wood that would test positive for BG3. And so you can literally, if you're a woodworker, you're handy, you can start making these shapes and just putting them around the stalks of your plants. Buy a BG16 pendulum to test for it, right? Test yourself, right? And if it tests positive for BG3, sick, dude, you're in, right? And so from there, what I do is I have the cube in the room. I have all the stickers on any electrical appliance. I have the adapters or the applicators on my water line, on my electrical panel, right? The basics. Then I'll do the rotation technique, which is when you put a plant in, like when you're transplanting it, you want to test it with the pendulum and see what is the angle at which it tests for the most BG3, right? Why that is, I don't know. I don't pretend to understand it. It's like nature, right? I don't understand
Right.
all the intricacies of soil food web, but I understand that what I can give to it will benefit it.
Right.
You know, that's as much as I like to get into. So that's one thing I'll do. I'll also do the color balancing technique, where depending on what colors you're putting there, usually reds and greens, you can test positive for more BG3. One of the things I've experimented with is feeding my plant psilocybin teas, because I had this weird experience, dude, where I was in California. And a buddy of mine who's really tapped in was like, hey, man, I'm friends with this tribe that is originally from South America. They're here in California doing ayahuasca ceremonies, and they grow cannabis. And at the end of every ceremony, they dump all the brew on the cannabis plants. And he was like, do you want me to buy you some? I'm like, dude, yes, I definitely want to see what that's like. So I tried it. And again, I've never done ayahuasca, but there was something very different about
But your
it.
cannabis plants have.
Yeah, exactly, right? So very different. So obviously I can't get ayahuasca brew, and I don't work with
Right.
that medicine, so I want to be respectful.
Right.
But I understand I work with psilocybin. So I was like, well, if it worked with ayahuasca, I wonder what happens with psilocybin. And I will tell you, man, it's very different. So for anyone out there, this is open source tech. Take it out, try it if it applies to you. You know, see what your own experience is. I'm not going to tell you it's always the same way. I don't know, right? This is very new stuff that, you know, a lot of my friends and I have a couple different growers that are experimenting with this stuff on a bigger scale too.
What's the difference you see?
Dude, so with ayahuasca, it was an older feminine spirit. Cannabis is kind of giggly and, you know, kind of like a female comedian in the way,
Yeah.
right? Like very wisdomful, but can make you laugh a lot, can also make you cry, can also state you straight. When I tried it with ayahuasca, it was the same thing, but it was kind of like your kind grandmother, you know,
Wow.
that
More
isn't
wise.
afraid to, you know, whip a wooden spoon at you if you need it, but that's not her first, you know,
Got
thing
it.
she's going to do, right?
Right.
She's probably going to sit you down and be a little slower with you and things like that. Whereas psilocybin is almost a little bit more like what acid does to humans. It's just a little more like, whoa, that's a little bit crazier. Like, again, it's subtle. It's not like you're tripping balls or
Right,
anything like
right,
you took
right.
psilocybin. But if you meditate with it, you will notice there's another spirit in there with it, you know?
Well, it makes sense because if you think in terms of, again, Masaru Emoto's work, Veda Austin's work, homeopathy, it's like you're taking a homeopathic dose of ayahuasca or of psilocybin and imbuing it into your cannabis plants. So you're going to get like a subtle homeopathic version or imprint when you then consume or smoke or whatever that cannabis.
Yeah. And it's
Makes
like, I tell
sense.
everyone, like, I don't have any science behind this, right? This is just me fucking around and finding out, but it is very interesting, dude.
Intentionally
you know?
fucking around and
Intentionally
finding out.
fucking around and finding out.
Right.
Exactly. You know, but, you know, again, it's just very interesting, you know, to see these things. And that's one of the main reasons I love growing in this way, dude, because it's really helped me so much. Nature is such a great teacher, man, and such full of wisdom, dude. I mean, it is God, you know, especially in the 3D plane. What's more God-like than the earth, you know,
Right.
and everything it creates. And, you know, at the end of the day, when you start to work in tandem with the laws of nature, with the rhythm of nature, life just starts unfolding in ways that you would never imagine. I mean, dude, you know, when I started cultivating with biogeometry and whatnot, you know, a lot of the friends that I've had since childhood and whatnot that, you know, were connecting with my cannabis, they're not tapped in, you know, they're great people. They're fucking awesome, but their passion is not what mine is. Right.
Yeah.
And that's totally okay. You know, but again, like they just knew like, oh, it's good weed, you know, like, and then I only smoked it for so long. Like I didn't really like see any difference, right? It's been a long time since I smoked like any like, you know, dispensary weed or whatever. But I remember it was the first time I gifted it to Paul Check. I went to HLC1 and I gave him like a small amount. Like I brought some out from me, like a couple of grams. And then I just realized like, oh, why don't I gift him some of this? You know, I've heard him talk about cannabis, didn't think anything of it. So he comes in the last day, HLC1. I think this is when they were still doing it at the Czech Institute. I think they do all the classes now at his personal house, but I gave him a little bit and I forgot about it. Right. And then that was like November. And then in March that year is when I went through that. I mean, actually, it was in October. A month later is when I had that big awakening in Vegas. And then all that happened. So now a year later, it's December of 2020. And I'm going out with a bunch of my Boston friends to Zen in the Garden at Paul's house. So I decided to bring him more. And I go out there and I see him walking alone at one point. So I'm like, hey, Paul, I got this thing for you. And I hand it to him. And he's like, dude, I've been looking for your number for a fucking year, man. He's like, I've never tried anything like that stuff. And I'm blown away. Like, Paul's my idol, right? Like, this is like fangirl moment for me. I'm like, what, huh? Like, because again, I just didn't see it. And he's like, dude, what are you doing with this stuff?
I just picture him obsessively like, who was that guy?
Yeah, and he's like, give me your number, dude. I need to talk to you. And I'm like, whoa. Like, that was like a huge thing for me. Yeah. Like, you know, again, because I didn't see anything of what I was doing yet. I was completely unaware of my power, you know, and again, we all have this power. I'm not saying that I'm anything better than anyone else, but I just hadn't clicked into my unique version of my own power yet, right? Which all of us get to some point in our lives if we're very lucky, you know, if we're lucky enough to tap into it in this lifetime. So I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. And he's like, what are you doing with this stuff, man? Like, I feel like, do you teach this stuff? And at that point, I didn't have any courses. I had nothing. And I was just getting into coaching. And I was trying to like learn sales and marketing and being a mindset coach and all this stuff because I had that background in psych, right? And so, you know, through meeting Check, he was like pushing me to do this stuff. And so I would, you know, go out to his house and gift him some every once in a while. And, you know, he'd always be like, what can I do for you, man? I'm like, just help me get on more podcasts, dude. I want to spread this stuff. And so, you know, about 8 months later after I'd given him that, he had, I'm trying to remember the order of events. It's so funny, dude. So I'd given him it a couple of times, and then he invites me out to his 60th birthday party. And so I go out there and I'm like hanging out with Raw Earth and Troy Casey and Kyle Kingsbury and Shirveen from Symbiotica. And I'm like, holy shit, this is crazy. And Paul's telling everyone like, yeah, Ryan's got the best cannabis ever. I met Laurel Erica there who recently passed away, dude. And we got to have such a beautiful conversation. I gave her some cannabis and she makes cannabis tea. She just steeps flowers in hot tea. That's how she decarbs it. Wow. And she would drink it and she was, you know, we became really close, man. And she was such an amazing soul. And I'll always, you know, be grateful to Paul for introducing me to so many amazing people, but especially her, because I'm such a big language nerd. Mark England is my first mentor in this space, and he's such a gangster with language and shifted my entire life. That's how I got myself out of the victim mentality. I never got into that, but right when I was going through that 3-month break, I took and lifted and I was doing all that. So anyway, you know, after that event, I get invited to this birthday party. I'm there and I tell him, I'm like, hey, man, I made a program, you know, and I was just excited to tell him. He's like, cool, let's get you on the show and let's talk about it. And now I'm like, oh my God, I've listened to Living 4D for years, right? And I was still playing very small at that point. So then I get on that show. And again, like everyone I'd given this cannabis to was saying the same things. And I'm like, this is weird because these are really tapped in people. I know they'd be honest with me if they didn't feel that. So after Paul Check's show, we're going up to make a bag, right? Because that's definitely Check, right? We're
100%.
Definitely
I first heard
zone.
About volcano bags through Paul Check.
Yeah,
of course.
Every room in his house is a bag zone for sure, you know?
Does he have one in every room?
He's got a few of them for sure. He's got like, I think like 5 or 6 of them, if I remember correctly, you know? And he's such a gangster with it, man. And he just, I mean, that's really his stuff, dude. He makes it work. And he's such an amazing, you know, he does bag science to an degree, dude. He's got like a million different herbs. And, you know, I can never get my bags to taste like him. I'm more of a simpleton with it. I'm like, cannabis, maybe a little bit of tobacco from time to time, maybe a couple herbs, some maybe essential oils, and that's where I stick. But basically what happened was after the podcast episode, what I thought I was going to ask him, dude, was, do you have any other podcasters that you could connect me to? And what actually came out of my mouth was, could you connect me to Aubrey Marcus? And I literally thought I was going to projectile vomit all over Paul when I said it. I don't know where it came from. I don't know if you ever had an experience like that where you just know what you're going to say and something totally different comes out, but it was really fucking weird. And he didn't even look up and he was like, yeah, man, I should be able to. He's like, hey, just to let you know, man, it's a big podcast. Aubrey, I don't think is a big fan of cannabis, you know? And I was like, dude, no worries, dude. I didn't even mean to ask that. Like imposter syndrome, like crazy came up. So then a couple weeks later, this is how weird this experience is. And this is why I wanted to tell this part of the story. Because during this time, I was manifesting going on Aubrey's podcast. I was doing it with cannabis, right? If you go back to my old podcast for anyone, or actually it'd be old content because I didn't do video back then, but I can send anyone this who doesn't believe me. In my old office, I had a vision board behind me. And the last thing, there was 4 things on there. The last thing was podcast appearances on Paul Check, Kyle Kingsbury, and Aubrey Marcus are secured. And this was when I was completely at a dispensary. I just had this big goal, dude. And I had no idea how it was going to happen. So all of a sudden, I remember coming home from checking that off and being like, that's weird, right? Like, because I didn't know that I could do that. Like, I didn't realize, because again, I still had old stories and everything like this. But as I was going through and lifted and doing psychedelics and doing them intention, things were shifting and I couldn't figure out what it was, dude. I didn't care. I was just like, the mystery of life is the best part, you know? So then a couple weeks later, I'm on the phone with my friend Jane. Now, Jane, I met at the dispensary. And she came in one day and was like, I think you're a Pleiadian. And I was like, what are Pleiadians? And we just became super close because we both love talking about really out there stuff. And so what ends up happening is she calls me telling me about a past life regression she had just had with some famous person because she works with really good people. And she had remembered a lifetime we both had lived in Atlantis where we learned how to manifest. And so when I was at the dispensary, I would talk about Paul Chek and Aubrey and all these people I looked up to. And then I was watching their podcasts and just like, inundating myself with hanging out with them through the virtual space. So I remember we're on the phone and she's like really hype about it. She's like, Ryan, we both learned how to do it and you still know how to do it. Look how you manifested meeting Paul Chek. And the second she says his last name, dude, I get a beep on my phone and it's Paul Chek. And typically, like at that point, he didn't call me that much, right? Like, we'll usually just text here and there. So I'm like, hey, Jan, I got to let you go. Paul's calling me. And she's like, whoa, that's weird. I'm like, all right. So I beep in. I'm like, hey, what's up, man? And he's like, well, I thought I'd call you and celebrate. I'm like, what are we celebrating? He's like, have you checked your email? I'm like, no. He's like, you should go do that. So I opened up my email and I saw the message that Paul had sent. And shout out to Paul, dude. Like, he sent the most beautiful message, not just to Aubrey, but to Josh and a couple other podcasters as well. But like, this is the best stuff I've ever done. This kid is like completely on point. All this stuff that I was like, holy shit, dude. The fact that someone I've looked up to that much received me in that way was like such a gratitude moment. It like really like pushed me to see myself more than I thought I saw myself at that point. And it was Aubrey getting back saying, dude, I'm in, connect me. And so I'm like, holy shit, this is like really happening. And I was like, this is fucking wild. Because I thought this had happened in like 10 years, dude. Mm-hmm. And here I am a year into like doing this stuff, maybe a year and a half, 2 years. And again, I have a 15-year background with cannabis, but it's come in stages. Here I am making this program. And now like I'm being hit up by some of the world's leaders in like fucking, podcasting and whatnot. So I end up flying down to Austin. I give Aubrey a little bit of my cannabis, or I give his team a little bit of my cannabis, and I fly back home. And I just forget about it, right? I'm like, holy shit, this is crazy. I was already over the moon. Like the fact that I even got some in his hands is crazy, and I knew he wasn't a big fan of cannabis. Well, then I wake up 2 weeks later and there's an email from Aubrey that's like this big. And he's like, dude, I got to tell you a story. He's like, bro, I'll be honest. My view of cannabis, like my whole life has been this dark view because for me, I've never really liked it. I've never experienced a good experience with it. Whenever I invite someone to the party who's a cannabis guy, they'll usually dab everyone out and they'll put everyone to bed. And I just haven't had a good, story around cannabis. And he's like, me and Vailana tried it, dude, and we're just obsessed, bro. He's like, dude, can I get any more? And when can you come down and do a show about this? So I'm like, holy shit, dude, this is really fucking happening. So I go down to May of 2022. I do his podcast. And like, again, I like pretty much blacked out just in flow state when I did it. And I was fucking really nervous, dude. Like, again, like it was a big thing for me. And what happened was after that podcast aired, I never expected it to do as well as it did. It's like his top 2 podcasts he's ever done in terms of views. It's blown the fuck up, dude. It changed my entire life. And me and him were laughing about it when I came to see him last time. He was like, dude, that thing's got a leg of its own, bro. Like it's got like 1.6 million views on YouTube alone.
Incredible.
And people are reaching out everywhere, dude. It showed me like, holy fuck, dude, this movement is really happening. Like what I envisioned is really happening. And I don't pretend to be the creator of it. It just tapped into my consciousness, maybe faster than other people before. Man.
Yeah.
But it's just fucking wild and magical, dude. And that's like, again, like I'm not crediting cannabis with that, but cannabis tapped me into the ability of me to see all this stuff myself.
Well, also like clearly what sparked that too is the intention, the passion that you put into growing cannabis, because you have these 2 people, Paul Chek, he's been a fan of cannabis for some time, but that says something, because it's like, so on one end of the spectrum, Paul Chek, been a fan of cannabis, says yours is the best that he's ever experienced. And then Aubrey, someone who was totally against cannabis at this point, experiences yours and is like, oh my God, this is incredible. And that's a testament to how much intention you put into it and how much passion you have behind this for the right reasons that is then reaping rewards and benefits in real time. And you're just on your path, man.
Dude, fuck yeah, bro. Thank you for that. Fully received.
For sure, yeah.
And dude, it's like, for me, like my whole thing is like, I really respect cannabis and plant medicines and other people and everything in this world so much because I understand everything has its purpose. And I just see right now that specifically because of the reasons we talked about, right? Practicality and things like that. Cannabis, like I'm a coach, right? This is what I do. And for me, I never want a client to think they need me to do their thing. Like I had a coach that said something to me that I took on, which are my 2 favorite days in coaching are when someone hires me and when they fire me, because I love when someone clicks in and they want something more. But I also love when they realize I got this now. I'm ready to go on to a different teacher or whatever. Like that
Amazing.
to me shows me I'm doing my job right. I don't want them to worship me. I don't want them to think they need me. All I'm here is a messenger to remind you of your own power, help you click into it, help you find your dream and fucking send it, you know? And that's what cannabis wants to. Whenever I've communed with the plant is like, dude, I'm just here to help humanity, right? I just want to be of service, right? It's a positively polarized plant like all psychedelics are. And it just wants people to figure out how to utilize it. And it wants people to remember their own power. And when we tap into these things, like, you know, one thing I believe now, all the stuff we're talking about, like, holy shit, we are so powerful. Holy shit, we are the creator of our reality. And it's because I worked with the plant intentionally that could remind me of that. And now I know that it's in my bones. I don't need the plant to continue helping me do all the things I've already done. Now the lessons the plant is teaching me can keep going, because it's like in high school, when you take algebra 1, if you fail that, you can't go on to algebra 2, right? You're going to have to keep learning algebra 1 until you pass it. But when you pass it, you can go on to the next step. And that's just how plant medicines work. They're not going to show you more than your consciousness can handle, because it can't show you more than you're already ready to handle. And so as you do the work on the side to integrate, right? And I always tell people, like, integration is actually the fucking most fun step, because you can take these PEAK, peak experiences you have with these medicines, right? Holy shit, I was one with God. Holy shit, I experienced myself as pure love. Any of these things that are very intangible at times, when you come back to your normal state of reality, it's not that the plant or medicine did that. They opened up what was already inside of you, past the limiting beliefs and all the nonsense you have currently piled onto you. So now your invitation, right, or mission, so you, as you should receive it, right, is to be able to figure out what is blocking me, what beliefs, stories, what do I believe about life, etc., that is blocking me from feeling that every moment of my life. And when you start diving into that, dude, it becomes fun, because now you work on one thing, and this is where cannabis becomes a personal growth and a very profound personal and spiritual growth tool, because now you start to have fun with it, right? Say you like integrate a couple of things, then maybe one thing you get stuck at. You're like, shit, I can't seem to solve this from the same level of thinking that created it, right? I'm stuck in a certain like level of thinking. You go behind the veil, you connect with cannabis, and you're like, I can't figure this out. Then you and the plant are laughing with each other. The plant's like, you mean this? And you're like, oh my God, that's what it is? Then you come back, right? And you wrote it down, whatever it was. And maybe you feel like it's impossible, whatever. You start working on it, even if you don't really fully believe it. All of a sudden you start feeling like, holy shit, dude, I now had a PEAK peak experience, or PEEK, which is then when you're in your sober state, typical waking state reality, you start to experience things that feel like the magic in a psychedelic space, right? You start to have synchronicities that you could never explain with modern, science, right? You start to have things that are so weird happen that you're like, dude, my life is becoming the psychedelic. And that's the goal, man. Like, a lot of people think that in order to be high all the time, you got to smoke weed all the time. Well, you can do that, but it's a huge detriment overall to your entire being. And you have to keep smoking all day to do it. Or you can just discover how to get high on your own supply the entire time with the help of these plants. And then the lessons they teach you keep getting more and more profound. And before you know it, your whole life is the psychedelic, and you become the psychedelic for everyone else around you. And you become the walking red pill, like I was talking about earlier, where the souls that are ready, they're going to see you and just be attracted to you like a beam of light. Then you help them remember, then they become a beam of light. And the people that resonate with them maybe wouldn't have resonated with you. So it is this collaborative effort, right? And that's why I tell everyone that's into the cannabis stuff, like, again, you can get inspiration from me, etc., but never feel like you have to do it my way, right? Because the way that I do it, even though it works for me, might not work for someone listening, but the way that you explain it might really resonate with them, right? So we all have a duty, if we resonate with this medicine, to figure out our own ways to say it, right? There's no SOPs here or anything, right? It's just like, let's all figure out what resonates and all bring whatever information it is, whether it's holistic health, romance, whatever it is, in our own unique way, because that's the way we reach everyone. We don't do it through one standardized approach. Amen. So true.
So for the people who are watching this or listening who have sort of this negative perception around cannabis and starting to listen to what you're saying, they're like, maybe there's more to it than I realized, but they still sort of have that anxiety coming up. You've talked about this 4-step process to ensure that you're connecting with cannabis consciously. Can you touch on that?
Definitely, man. So, I always like to give a lot of practicality with this, because once again, right, don't believe anything I say, right? That would be giving away your power as well. You can get curious about what I'm saying, but, again, like I say often, we're stuck in a world where a lot of people would rather study an apple, understand the components of it, look into pectin, but not actually go eat the apple. But yet at the same time, they think they know an apple, right? So at the end of the day, I always like to leave practical steps so that anyone listening to this can be like, you know what, let me go try this out for me. And again, cannabis is not the plant for everyone, right? It's just one river that leads to the same sea as many other rivers. But for anyone who resonates with this, that feels cannabis is their plant, maybe you've never felt like that before, right? Or things like that. One of the things that I like to teach is this 4-step process. So the first step is taking a weekly break, right? Now, this is not just some random rule. I'm sure you guys have realized I'm not a rules guy, right? I don't like to be boxed into the all. I've avoided rules my entire life.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, right, exactly. On opposite day, But it's like, one of the things I'm aware of is that I never want anyone to think that what I'm about to say is the right way. It's just a way to experience a more psychedelic side of cannabis. Because like you were saying in the beginning, right? A lot of us that connect with cannabis, we connect with it every day and, we enjoy it. But like, I don't know, maybe we remember a couple of weird experiences when we first connected with it, but we don't think of it as a psychedelic. That's why I tell everyone the first step is if you're going to experience the psychedelic side of cannabis, if you want to start tapping into the power of cannabis to be a powerful tool for personal and spiritual growth and transformation and healing, take a 3-day break, right? Now, that 3-day break is going to flush your endocannabinoid system, the system that actually regulates the phytocannabinoids, THC, CBD, et cetera, that are found in the cannabis plant. So what's going to happen is if you're connecting with cannabis every day, it's not wrong or whatever, right? We can talk a little bit about addiction and things like that, because that is something we should cover for sure after this. But again, like, it's not wrong. It's just to understand, like, if you're looking for this type of experience, you're probably not going to get it if your endocannabinoid system is saturated from daily use.
Got it.
There are ways. We can talk about a couple of the ways to potentiate the effects of cannabis too, and a couple of the ways to bring them down as well, just in case people get too far out, because that can happen. But the first thing is to take a dieta, right? And the reason I talk about a dieta and not just a regular break is because in traditional indigenous and shamanic cultures, when you take these breaks of sobriety, it's not just about disconnecting from the plant. It's also about being very intentional with the water you're drinking, the food you're eating, the sleep you're getting, the movement you're doing, the people you're around, et cetera, right? It's being very intentional with creating the purest vessel you possibly can for this medicine to work through. Some people fast through it. For me, I've done the fasting. I've done those kind of things. For me, I don't notice too much difference, to be honest. Maybe if I did a longer fast or a longer break, whatever, I haven't done that yet.
I'd love to see how you feel doing like a 15-day water fast.
Exactly. Like, I'm sure that would definitely ramp things up, But after you've taken your 3-day break, right, you've cleared a lot of the cannabis that was in your system out of it. The second step is to create an intention, right? Very easy, not rocket science here, right? Very easy stuff to implement. So with intention, I think a lot of people think it's got to be something like, I want to go to the nebula galaxy and be an infinite star seed. And like, sure, it can be that, right? Like, go for it if that's what resonates. It could also just be like, I want to experience the happiest I've ever been.
Right.
I want to feel what maybe my hand is in this relationship challenge I'm having right now. I want to be able to be more creative, right? Whatever it is. And the most important thing is when you set the intention, forget about it, right? Like a crock pot, set it and forget it. Because how the plant is going to manifest that intention could be wildly different than what your brain thinks is going to happen. Like,
set the intention, release expectation.
Exactly, dude. Like, I have people reach out to me to like, dude, I made an intention to be happy and I felt anxious. It's like, well, how do you know the plant wasn't like, well, I could give you happiness right now. I could give you a fish, right, and let you eat for a day. Or I could just help you move right through the only thing blocking you from having lifelong happiness, right? Or at least until something else clouds you over and you got to move that. And I could teach you how to fish and you can eat for a lifetime. So again, like, the most important thing is when you set that intention, know you've done your intention, right? You've done your side of the bargain. Now let the plant do the rest, right? The rest of it is the plant's challenge to work with, right? Or the plant's opportunity to work with. Once you've set that intention, you want to create a ceremonial container, right? Ceremony is the third step. Now, once again, with ceremony, I think a lot of people think I got to wear white robes and do all these things. You can, right? But I think, again, practicality wise, for me, what I think of ceremony as is an intentional container where your intention can play out within. Mm-hmm. So for instance, the way that I personally look at ceremony is I don't think it has to be in a certain ashram. I don't think it has to be with white robes, right? Again, it can, but it doesn't have to be. So I think for a lot of people, when they start hearing this stuff, they're like, oh man, like, does this mean I can never get high and watch a movie again. I'm like, no, just be aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it, right? I've had beautiful breakthroughs watching an amazing movie with my partner where we're like, we want to connect and cuddle and we want to watch this movie. It's a good hero's journey. You know, we connected with cannabis and watched the Bob Marley movie the other night and it fucking fired me up, dude. Made me cry because I was just looking at how much this guy was of service, dude, and how much he cared about people and how much he was such a steward for not just the earth, but cannabis, and how much he really put cannabis on the map. You know, he did his work to like make people realize this plant is more than what you think it is. So at the end of the day, some examples of a ceremonial container could be, let's say you're working through a romantic challenge. Maybe you and your partner got into an argument and you're taking some space to allow alchemy to do its work, right? Separation, right? That stage of alchemy. So you both take some space and you're like, you know what? You know, I want to see what's going on. You know, I'm feeling very triggered and I feel like maybe my ego's hiding something from me. Maybe like my partner is actually onto something. This happens a lot, you know, like throughout my life. And I'm sure it happens for everyone listening, you know, especially for men. I find women are very beneficial for us, right? And I imagine for people that are homosexual, the feminine counterpart, same thing. But again, like, you know, Rachel has an ability to call me out on things that naturally will trigger me. And then like about 10 minutes later after, you know, I've either meditated or connected with cannabis, I'm like, fuck, she was right, you know?
Right,
and what an amazing, you know, I mean, women are just so powerful, dude.
Right.
And again, the feminine energy is just fucking dope, dude. It's really cool. So again, maybe in that scenario, I'm going to sit in a room like this. I'm going to meditate. Maybe I'll have music on. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'm going to do some breath work. Maybe I'm going to go take a walk in nature. Maybe if I'm feeling out of sorts. But let's say that you and Aaron are coming to Boston, right? And you guys are like, I've never been to Boston before. Well, dude, like, I'm not going to be like, all right, let's sit in this silent room. Like, I mean, maybe I will if you guys are like, I had a crazy challenging flight. But more than likely, I might be like, dude, let's go to like a concert or something like that, right? So we're going to create a ceremonial container where we create the intention to connect more and dance all night and have a blast and just light up the whole dance floor. And that to me is a ceremonial container as well, you know? Because again, dude, like Paul Chek says, great spirit is down for whatever. These things that humans put on it, they're human rules, right? And anything that boxes me in, I want to get rid of as fast as possible.
Right.
The biggest thing is that I'm aware of what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and what I'm looking to get from it. So once you've created a ceremony, you've gone through that, the fourth and final step is integration. This is where you take that PEAK experience that we talked about and you create the PEEK peak experiences, where you start to realize in no uncertain terms that you are the creator of your own reality, just like every sacred text has talked about, and that you can change your reality based on how you think, what you believe, etc. And when you get into that, dude, I mean, all of life becomes a game. You know, it becomes the game that it was meant to be. And so for anyone listening, try those 4 steps out, right? And we have a great guide that we'll give you as well. The first step is the Conscious Cannabis Quiz. And for anyone that hops on that, what we'll do is the next day, we'll send you the Conscious Cannabis Workbook, which will go deeper into the kind of spirituality and philosophy behind those 4 steps. And then also the 3 ways to understand the language in which cannabis speaks, being feminine medicine, a mirror, and imagination medicine.
Amazing.
You know, which
all
again,
that will be in the show notes, by the way,
yeah,
for people who are watching or listening.
Heck yeah.
Incredible, man.
Dude, so fun.
We talked about, or you'd mentioned potentiating the effects of cannabis.
Yes. Yeah. So this is something cool too. So for everyone listening, you've been to Breathe with Cannabis, right?
Yeah,
and
it was incredible.
One of the main reasons we do that, I mean, again, like experiencing cannabis as a plant medicine is one thing, but for me personally, I get the most excited when people are like, I don't know if I believe cannabis is a psychedelic. And I'm like, hey, you don't have to believe me, man. Come to Breathe with Cannabis.
I told Chris, I recounted it on the last episode, so I'm not going to do it again. But dude, mine was very much a psychedelic experience and a very playful one too, for me.
So fun, bro. Dude, what started happening was, like, obviously I understand it to be a psychedelic. We started doing these, dude, and we had over and over and over and over people being like, dude, that was stronger than ayahuasca. But the difference is they could come on a camera an hour after having the medicine and talk about how it was stronger than ayahuasca. Try doing that on 5 grams of mushrooms, right? Now imagine, once again, we'll go back to practicality for a second. Imagine you're a parent, right?
Yeah.
You're in here, you're having a full-on experience, right? One of your kids is like, Dad, I spilled milk all over the floor. You can hop up, go out there, wipe it up, probably laugh at them like, it's no big deal, and go back down and lay right back into your ceremony, right? Try doing that on other medicines. It's not that, again, these medicines aren't amazing. I'm not here to do a hierarchy, but it's very hard to do that.
Right.
So for anyone looking to potentiate, right? This is for advanced users that maybe are daily users, very experienced with cannabis. Don't do this if you're a new user. You don't need it. But if you're an experienced user, what you can do is you can do 3 things, right? One is mango. Mango increases, mango is big in a terpene called myrcene. It has a lot of myrcene in it. And myrcene acts as a an aid to the blood-brain permeability of delta-9 THC to cross the blood-brain barrier.
Whoa.
So if you potentiate your system with myrcene, you're going to have a much deeper ability for delta-9 THC to cross this blood-brain barrier, and the translation is you get much stronger of effect very quickly. To me, it's almost like doing lemon tech mushroom tea versus eating mushrooms, right? When you are doing something to convert that psilocybin into psilocin before you have to do it, your body does it, dude, it just slams you, right? So that's one thing. The next thing is dark chocolate. Now, dark chocolate has anandamide in it. Anandamide is an endogenous cannabinoid, right? Ananda comes from the Sanskrit word bliss. It's the bliss molecule. For anyone who works out, you understand anandamide. It's what the runner's high is. It's why you feel so good after a workout, right? And our system just perfectly imitates what cannabis has within it. And that's one of the biggest evidences I find that, like, we co-evolve with this plant, like, guys. Like, we literally have a system where the phytocannabinoids in this plant perfectly match up with the receptor sites of the endogenous cannabinoids in our body that are key for appetite, sleep, nervous system regulation, where they fit in, right? So anandamide is the second thing, and dark chocolate has a lot of that in it. The third thing is CBN. Now, CBN is actually just degraded THC, or delta-9 THC. So if you take a nug of flour, right? Like, maybe this is a trick for anyone at home. A lot of people have challenges with sativas, right? They get maybe something and they're like, oh God.
It's so weird. I'm the opposite. I have trouble with indica. I love sativa. I love sativas.
I fucking love sativas, dude. I've called myself a sativa diva for years. You know?
I don't do well with indicas though.
Yeah, I've recently in the last
I haven't tried
few
any of
years,
yours though. So I mean,
dude, I gave you some indicas, so check it out, bro. Because dude, like when I got into the indicas that I grow up with the biogeometry too, it doesn't annihilate you. It just is like vacation vibration, dude. And I started realizing with the businesses and whatnot, like, I could benefit from some more of that, you know? Like,
also, like getting it in Colorado from organic, and you never, there's
know.
Organic, and then there's biogeometry, Korean natural farming. All that's like,
it's a level that most growers are not going to go to. And I don't blame them.
More people go that direction, though. Man. Me too. That's what's needed. It's the same thing as like regenerative agriculture, permaculture for growing food, like that. Is going to be much better than the USDA organic stamp that you buy in the grocery store. It's just the reality.
Exactly. 100% too. Because once again, like the bigger the institution gets, the less care they can have.
Exactly.
In it, you know?
Exactly.
It's just the process of how life works, you know? And so for me, like the idea, and I'll say this real quick too, or actually I'll finish this other thought first. But again, for CBN, right? Like, if you have this sativa, right, that maybe you're like, I don't like sativas, right? Or maybe you even have an indica, but you're like, I really just like using cannabis to help me sleep. Maybe you have insomnia or whatever. You can take a nug of that and just leave it out on the counter. And that THC will degrade into CBN. And CBN is much more like narcotic feeling, right? Not to give an analogy to pharmaceuticals, but it's much heavier, right? Mm-hmm. It'll like give you like coma sleep, basically, right? Where you like wake up and you can just throw yourself in any position and fall back asleep for hours. So CBN potentiates delta-9 THC, and it also adds to the psychedelicness of it as well. So, you know, what we've toyed with the idea of doing is having little kits that breathe with cannabis when we do it live anyway, saying, hey, if you're an advanced user, if you've come here before and maybe you have challenge with like, you know, because again, we're not like smoking a lot of cannabis there. We're doing like, most people take 3 or 4 hits, right? We're always telling people go low and slow. You don't need a lot. But for every once in a while, someone does need a lot. Maybe they're using it for a medical reason. They have to be utilizing a lot of it. So for those kind of people, give them a little kit, have them eat a piece of mango with a piece of dark chocolate, have them take a little 10 milligram dose of CBN. Dude, that shit really increases the effects, dude. I mean, I remember the first time I ever tried mango. I went to Stop and Shop. I had found out about this when I was at cannabis school. Bought a bunch of mangoes. I was into juicing at that point, and I juiced like 4 mangoes, dude, right? And I'd never eaten a mango. I was like trying to cut it. I'm like, what the hell is this big pit in the middle, right? So I finally got all the stuff into the juicer. And I down it. And again, this is at a very unconscious point in my life. And I just totally forgot about it. My friends and I, they come over later. We roll a blunt up and we're smoking. And I'm like, my heart is pounding, dude. And I'm like, yo, I feel really high right now. And usually I can like rip a blunt like that, no problem at that point in my life. I'm like, what is different? You know? And all of a sudden I'm like, the mango, it worked, right?
Wow.
And so then, of course, I tried it many more times and I realized, yeah, this shit's got legs to it for sure. And then I started, you know, explaining it to my clients and teaching it, and they were coming back with the same results. So then I started to find out what else can do this. And that's when I found dark chocolate, CBN, and breath work. Breath work is the fourth thing, right? I said I was going to give you guys 3 ways. I gave you 4, right? So breath work, the interesting thing about breath work is that cannabis produces melatonin in our brain. And melatonin acts as a precursor for the DMT that we produce endogenously in our being. And so the translation of that is if you have more precursor on hand and you've potentiated how potent that cannabis is going to be, and then you start creating DMT from that, we all know how powerful DMT is. No wonder people are coming back saying, holy shit, that was stronger than ayahuasca. Holy shit, that was the most profound experience of my life, right? And again, don't believe what I say. Come out and experience it for yourself,
I've
right?
experienced it myself, and I gotta say, like I've never sat with ayahuasca, but it very much felt like a psychedelic experience that I've never once in my life experienced consuming cannabis.
It's crazy,
Ever.
bro. You know, and again, like we keep these workshops super affordable because for us, it's not about the money for that. It's about having people have that ignition experience where they're like, oh, wow, I just experienced that cannabis was everything that maybe I've heard Ryan talk about or way deeper than anything I've heard about. Now I'm curious, right?
Yeah.
Because again, I can say all this stuff and listeners, you might find it interesting, but until you've experienced it, like, you know, it's a totally different thing. Because again, life is not an observation sport, right? Like as Joe Dirt says, life's a garden, go dig it, right? Like, you know, again, you can't just read about these things and think you've experienced them, right? Like, so Paul Chek talks about, you know, where most of us are getting PhDs in life, piled higher and deeper in other people's subjective universes. So the ability of us to go, that inspires me. It feels awesome to me. It feels fun. I'm going to go try it out.
Right.
That's how maybe someone has a totally different way to explain it than I do, that it resonates again with other people that I can't reach, you know? So then we need everyone working together. This is a big synergistic movement, right? Not just with cannabis, with everything, meditating, breath work, holistic health, regenerative ag, all these things, you know? So
what about minimizing the effects of cannabis?
Yeah. So this is good too, because let's say that, you know, maybe you're someone who's had a traumatizing experience with cannabis before. Maybe you've had some dark cannabis that someone grew, right? Or things like that. It's always important. It gives you a lot of solace and safety to have these in the house, right? Three main ways. Number one, nano-encapsulated CBD. Now, I recommend getting a full spectrum always. I don't recommend the isolates because when you do isolates, you miss out on the entourage effect, which basically means that when everything is together, it helps that everything helps each other work better, right? Once again, you can't outsmart nature, you know? So get a full spectrum CBD tincture. Now, here's the thing though. You know, CBD is one of those cannabinoids that people just do silly things with. So you ever walk into a coffee shop and they're like, do you want to spike your coffee with 5 milligrams of CBD for $5? Don't fall for that shit. CBD is a much less potent cannabinoid than THC. So with THC, you could take 5 milligrams and probably feel something. CBD, you want to be taking probably a minimum of 100 more regularly, especially if you're going through a challenging experience, like 200-300, maybe even more, half gram, 500
so anything
milligrams.
Lower than that is essentially a scam at a place.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
no reason to do
It's
it.
just
Okay,
silly.
that makes sense.
And what I recommend is you go on, I believe it's called Lazarus Naturals. I'm not affiliated with them, but you go online and look up CBD RSO, and you get CBD dominant RSO, Rick Simpson oil. And you can get like a 5,000 milligram syringe. It's not an actually syringe, but that's just what they call them. And I hate that they call them that, but it's like an applicator basically. And you can get it for like $80. That's going to be the best deal you find on CBD. And RSO is the most medicinal form of cannabis, I believe, on planet Earth, besides maybe juicing the leaves. So, and you can juice the flowers too, and it won't be intoxicating. But that's the first way, right? Have that in the house. And if you're going through a challenging experience, just take a bunch of it, right? CBD, again, is non-intoxicating. You know, you have these two main cannabinoids that people talk about, THC and CBD. THC acts as a gas pedal to your endocannabinoid system and therefore your nervous system. CBD acts like as a brake pedal. And that's why a lot of these people are having challenges because they're already drinking a lot of coffee, they're upregulated, and now they're going for high THC and they're getting fucking hellish experiences, right? So again, like you got to counteract that the way that nature made it. Because if you look at the way that landrace and heirloom strains grow, they don't have this ridiculous amount of THC. It's all balanced, but a lot of the times it's way stronger overall, right? Because everything is perfectly balanced. Once again, you cannot outsmart nature. I'll be a broken record here. So that's the first thing, nano-encapsulated CBD. Second thing is black pepper kernels. Black pepper kernels have caryophyllene in them, and caryophyllene acts as a, I believe it's called an antagonist to delta-9 THC. So it actually mitigates the intoxicating effects of it. You'll actually hear Willie Nelson talk about this. That's his technique. He started getting a lot of paranoia with cannabis and he thought he was going to have to quit. And who's Willie Nelson without cannabis, right? So he started chewing on the kernels and he found it helped him, right? It's an old wives' tale and it does work. It does work. We bring him to every breather with cannabis just in case. And we usually have one person that needs to come down and that works great. The third way is down regulatory breathing. And actually I have a fourth way too. I'm going to throw in a bonus, but
cool.
Down regulatory breathing, box breathing. All you have to do here is make sure your exhale is longer than your inhale. Whenever your exhale is longer than your inhale, it's going to tell your body through your nervous system that things are safe, it's okay to calm down, and you're going to start down regulating your nervous system. That's really what it is. When you're going through a panic experience with cannabis, you are overly upregulated, you're stuck in fight or flight, and your being thinks there's a tiger next to you or something, that you're going to die.
Especially with breathing, it pulls you from your headspace, because I find my negative experiences on cannabis, I was like in my head, like consumed by my thoughts. Breathing pulls you back into here.
Definitely.
Automatically.
Exactly, dude. And so that's one of the best things. Even if you don't have the CBD or black pepper kernels, remember that. Just get back to a longer exhale and inhale and just stick on that. Every time your mind wanders, go back to the breath. It wanders again, go back to the breath. It wanders again, go back to the breath. And before you know it, you'll just won't have that anymore. You'll be like, oh, I'm calm again, right? The fourth thing is to remind yourself that this is exactly what needs to be happening right now. One of the biggest ways that people get really messed up when it comes to psychedelics is that they start having a challenging experience and they start thinking that this shouldn't be happening, this wasn't supposed to happen, and now they can't place that event in the context of what makes sense for their evolution and their well-being, and they start to go through a very damaging experience where they stop and start believing they're the victim of the experience once again. Understand, like we talked about in the beginning, that one of the best things you can have happen from this medicine is for it to show you where you are blocking yourself, where your and your comfort zone is, your growth zone, right? Like where you're prohibiting your own magic with anxiety or programs of fear and things like that. That is actually one of the best things we can get from this experience of cannabis or other plant medicines. So reminding yourself with the mantra, I took a medicine and the medicine is working, right? Reminding yourself, I chose to do this. I am prepared for this. I am in a safe space, which is why set and setting is important, right? I know how to handle this. I know that right now my brain is going to tell me that things are fucked, that I'm going to die, all these things, but I'm not going to believe any of that. I'm just going to go back to my breath and I'm going to have faith, right? And the more that you do that, now let's say you get in an argument with your partner or you have a damaging work event or something. Well, you already know that you can bring yourself down and you start becoming your own guru. And that's what I want to articulate here is that these things, yes, they're important to do with cannabis, right? They can help cannabis experiences, but it goes much deeper than that. This is life training, right? This is training for, again, we can't understand or we can't make the external reality fit our internal demands. We're going to live a very disempowered life if we try to do that. But if we start realizing that we can be our own guru, that the age of the guru is dead, right? That we have everything we need within us, and that sometimes we just forget and we need a reminder, right? Which is what a coach or a plant medicine or any of these things do. But the point is to always remember that these things are helping us see our own power. Then before you know it, bro, even your most challenging experiences, you'll be like, ooh, I know what happens on the other side of this. And then you'll find fun in it. And that's what starts happening, dude. Shadow work starts getting fun because after a while you realize I always come back together okay. Even if I see something really scary, I'm the one that gets to choose how I see this event happening. Yeah. And if I can find, whatever you choose to believe, you'll find evidence for, right? And that's one of the, best things about different, things I teach in Connect with Cannabis and different programs I have is I'll have people find evidence for both things. Like, hey, you believe cannabis is bad? Find the evidence for it, right? Strengthen the argument, right? I actually have them do it in an exercise called flipping the script, right? We look at a limiting belief, right? Like, I'm not good enough, or I'll never be able to be an entrepreneur, whatever it is popping up for you. And then I have them actually find 3 supporting pieces of evidence, right? Let's strengthen this argument. Then I have them connect with cannabis and do some language shifts and create an affirmation out of that negation, right? So from I'm never going to be a good entrepreneur to I am in the process of becoming the entrepreneur I want to, right? Or something like that. Then I have them find 3 supporting pieces of evidence to support that one. Then I have them say, what did you learn? They're like, well, it clearly seems like there's evidence on both sides. So I'm like, okay, what do you want to believe now? That's the only question you have. Right? Either way, you're the one that's going to have to live with it. So again, with great power comes great responsibility because you can choose to believe that you're powerless. You can choose to believe you're the victim. The mainstream wants you to do that. Think about all the, I don't like to get into politics, but what the left is doing is just like really weird. Like, yeah, you are a victim. You're powerless. Look how that ends up, dude. Not my flavor of ice cream, not the results I want. And for me, I only listen to the people getting the results I want. If someone from the left is going to tell me something, I'm not going to listen to them. You tell me something, I'm going to be like, tell me more about that because you're getting the results I want. You're an open-hearted individual. You have solid connections. You have good family values. You do amazing things. You follow your heart. That's the person I want to listen to. Amen. And what I want to leave everyone with too is that, we're in a world where everything is censored. A lot of things are lies. AI's there. We don't really know what's true, etc. the only way to know what real truth is to look at the results people are getting in life, right? If you like the results I'm getting in life, right, where I'm following my dream and things like that, that would be a reason to listen to what I'm saying. If you don't, if these don't resonate with you, I'm probably not the right guy for you,
Right.
you know? And at the end of the day, if we can all go through life like that, it allows, there's so much information, dude, it's overwhelming. So like, for instance, when I watched I couldn't believe it wasn't a comedy special, but when I watched the pandemic bullshit of like, hey, come get your vaccine because you can get a free hamburger and they're eating Wendy's, I'm like, those aren't the results I want. So I'm not even going to listen or entertain them. They don't exist in my world.
Right.
I just closed all that out. Then when I would hear Paul Chek and all these things, they would speak about exactly what I was feeling. Like, guys, when has the government ever cared? Like, please don't believe this, right? And I was like, yeah, dude, I've been into that since I was 17. And the first time I worked Zeitgeist when I was high, everything changed for me.
Zeitgeist high? Oh,
that was like one of the first things that started to wake me up.
Yeah.
You know, 9/11, money, and religion all in one, you know?
Right.
And so again, for me, that's how I view life. You know, I could look at all this information. I could just say, who are the people doing it and who am I going to listen to based on the results they're getting?
Right.
And that for me, you know, whenever I look at people that are damaging cannabis and all these things and talking shit about it, they're usually the people that think they're the victim in life, right? And again,
Totally.
hey, discernment, you pick your own life. It's perfectly divine, but it ain't my thing, you know? So
Beautiful.
too funny, man.
Last thing, share your courses and offerings that you have.
Definitely, dude.
And again, in the show notes for everyone listening, watching.
Heck yeah. So if you want to find me, you guys can probably tell I love talking, right? I fucking love it.
This has been awesome, though,
Dude,
man. You
so
made my
much fun,
job
bro.
easy, too. I'm just over here smiling, like just like this the whole time.
Well, dude, we were saying, bro, like podcasting with other podcasters is so fun.
Yeah.
Because we barely have to ask questions, dude. Like I'll just, you know, whenever I have a podcast around, I'll ask like one question. They'll go for like 20 minutes. I'm like, dude, this is awesome, bro.
Yeah,
Talking about cool
exactly. Because
shit.
they know how to continue carrying on a conversation, but this is also just so fascinating.
So fun, dude.
And we,
you know?
we connect on so many things.
Oh my
dude,
God,
so-
dude. We're like soul brothers from another mothers,
exactly,
dude. Remember
man.
when we were at Aaron's house the first time joking about Viore and I was like, this kid, right? Because I can always tell, bro, from me, and again, if anyone resonates with this, you can take it. But for me, I can always tell if someone is really intellectual and very in their heart and they can still laugh like a little kid and be a goofball. That's when I'm like, that's the sign of someone with a very high level of consciousness. And those are my favorite kind of people, dude. And immediately, like when we were joking, I forget what it was, but you know, we could joke about all these things. I was like, dude, Alex a real one, man.
Thanks,
like,
bro. I
fucking love
appreciate
you, bro.
that.
It was
Yeah, I
so
love
cool
you
getting
too,
to fucking
man.
hang
It's-
out and do all this cool stuff at Confluence and whatever.
Yeah, man.
And you run a great show, dude. It's been amazing being on. Thank you so much for it.
Yeah.
And you know, if people want to find me, you know, again, this stuff gets a lot of questions and rightfully so, right? Like, you know, maybe you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not sure. Maybe you aren't sure what discernment feels like and whatnot. Reach out, ask questions, right? Like this is my life's work. I love doing this because of what it represents. It's not just about cannabis, like I've said over and over. It's about the connection. It's about the love. It's about bringing joy back into people's lives. It's about realizing that life can be fun. Healing can be fun. Nothing has to be doom and gloom. Nothing has to be fearful, right? The powers that shouldn't be, right? That again, have a purpose. I'm grateful for them. They feed on fear, right? If you want to live that way and go into the negative polarity, dude, awesome. Like Aaron says, the worst choice you can make is not make a choice. You want to go into negative polarity? Cool. Plays a role in life. But if you resonate with a positive polarity, that's the best thing you can do, right? Is to be able to raise your frequency and tap into that feeling of love. And so for anyone that resonates with this, wants to reach out at the real Ryan Sprague on Instagram, Sprague is my last name. And funny story about that also. You want to hear a weird synchronicity?
Yeah, let's hear it.
So there's another Ryan Sprague out there. Because when I went on the Aubrey, I was like, I should make sure my address isn't out there or whatnot. I don't want people like randomly stopping by. And so I looked on Google and there was nothing about me. And there was this other Ryan Sprague that is the fucking host of Mysteries Decoded and a regular on Ancient Aliens, bro. And I was like, what the fuck? So I reached out to him on Instagram. We're going to do a podcast together on my podcast.
You have to.
Dude, just to have like a weird paradox inception moment, you know? But anyway, he's equally real, but I'm at the real Ryan Sprague. And if you want, I'm going to give you a couple different things, but the first point of entry for anyone who's maybe curious, but you know, maybe wants to try it out is the Conscious Cannabis Quiz, right? That's going to grade your level of consciousness in your relationship with cannabis. And it's also going to give you a little bit of background about addiction and things like that, which caveat, right? We didn't get a lot into it. I've talked about it on every podcast I've been on, so it's not really worth repeating, but I will give you the caveat. For anyone that feels they're addicted to cannabis, they're not addicted to cannabis. They're addicted to escaping the feelings of discomfort stemming from unconscious traumas that right now are unconscious, right? And as you start to, you know, uncover these unconscious traumas and realize how to heal them, you will naturally stop needing to find external feelings of comfort for those reasons.
Amen.
And you will start switching from utilizing cannabis to get out of pain to utilizing cannabis to run towards pleasure. And that is a very different, dichotomy there, right? Different points of view. And so I wanted to say that because that's like the biggest thing people hit me up about. It's like, I'm addicted. And I'm like, I understand. I'm going to meet you where you're at. And I bring people through different exercises to help them realize that, right? But I always like to add that in just so if anyone's listening, they know there is hope to that, right? You can definitely break your addiction to cannabis completely without having to quit in as little as 30 days. That's what I teach in Clarity with Cannabis, our first course. But basically, once you get the Conscious Cannabis quiz, you'll get a grade on that. The next day, we'll send you the workbook, which will go into a little bit more of like actually connecting with it as a spiritual aid and ally. And then from there, you have different points of entry, right? Choose your own adventure. You can dive into just the Clarity with Cannabis course. We have that for like $97. We kept it super cheap. That's break your addiction in 30 days without having to quit. You're going to uncover your unconscious triggers there. You're going to create morning and nighttime rituals to give you energy in the morning and relax you at night. You're going to create a lot of vision for what you want your relationship with cannabis to be and why you want it to look like that, what it means to you, why you're even choosing to do any of this, what your dreams are in life, all of that. We're going to clear on all that. And then we also have the Grow course, right? Grow with Cannabis, where you can dive in. But the biggest thing we do and the thing that I find the most fulfillment in is the Conscious Cannabis Collective, which has everything in it, right? Everything but Breathe with Cannabis. Those are separate every month. But, again, we have the Clarity with Cannabis course, Break Your Addiction, Connect with Cannabis, supply the foundation for understanding the science and ceremony of cannabis, understanding how to access the psychedelic state with cannabis, and then Expand with Cannabis. Really tap into cannabis for transformation and healing so you can reach self-actualization through the support of the plant. And then from there, we got the Grow course in there, and we do community calls on our Sunday, right? Our Sunday service. And you get to ask me any questions you want. And the most important thing is we do retreats and everything like that. But underneath all of this, right? The reason I do all of this with cannabis and, my other coaching and things like that is not because of any one of these things. It's about the fact that one of the biggest issues we're told in society right now is that we have an epidemic of loneliness. But the problem with that theory is that loneliness is the result. It's not the problem.
Right.
The problem is lack of connection. The same way that people look at cannabis as the problem when really it's trauma that's the problem. And cannabis is just the applied solution that people that don't know how to get over it with their own internal, diagrams, that's what they utilize to get over it. We have to look deeper than that. So really what I'm looking to do and what I pride myself on more than anything is being someone who's naturally good at connecting people and connecting with people and being able to say, hey, you need to know this person, and then bring in tribes together. Because for me, that is the rarest thing in the world. And for me, I didn't know that for years, dude. I've always been fortunate. Like I've always been very rich when it comes to friends. And then when I started traveling around and meeting so many people, they're just like, dude, I have no one. I have no one. And I'm like, holy shit, dude, this is the real epidemic or pandemic,
It is, man.
And so that's what the mastermind is all about. Like, let's come together. Let's learn how to utilize this plant that we all resonate with to increase self-awareness. And then whatever that awareness is, let's all help each other integrate that,
Incredible.
Work together, and be able to support each other's dreams and light the fucking world up together and leave the Garden of Earth greener than when we found it and leave a legacy that future generations can be proud of, dude, that they can talk about like, wow, my ancestors, they were gangsters, dude. Like they lived by the earth. They did amazing things. Sure, they utilized technology, but they learned how to utilize it in a way that didn't damage the earth. And they really allowed themselves to be stewards, right? And be of the earth, but not in it, So that's my ultimate goal. That's where people can find me. Tap into the free resources, check them out, and definitely reach out if you have any questions, man. And then Breathe with Cannabis, we do once a month. The tickets are $55, super cheap. Come join that community and come see for yourself what I'm talking about, see if it applies for you.
Definitely recommend that too. The Breathe with Cannabis. It's incredible, man. This was such a fun conversation, dude, bro. I love this,
bro. This may be the longest show I've ever done too, bro. I'm like, dude, we could have gone forever, bro. I'm like, this is so awesome.
Yeah, this has been great, man. Thank you so much for joining me, Ryan.
Thank you.
And if you're watching this or listening and you enjoyed this show, please be sure to share it with a friend or family member. Share it on your social medias and stay tuned for more.